we got to start out with a little bit of a solemn moment here. I just found out today, and it might have just happened today or within the last couple of days, a gentleman named Jack McAuliffe had passed away. Jack he built the first actual microbreweries. I don't like the term craft. It built the first microbrewery in 1976. The story, as I was told, he was in the Navy and spent a lot of time in Scotland and absolutely fell in love with the beers there. And so when he came back here, he wanted to do that. And granted, Fritz Maytag was considered the grandfather, but he had bought Anchor and it was already operating. Jack basically made a Frankenstein brewery. He found old 55-gallon stainless Coca-Cola drums of some sort and built a brew house out of them. And it just was very interesting. And a good friend of mine, Alan Dick, he did visit him and he said it was quite an operation and the beer was quite good. But what struck Alan at that time was he went to the brewery and, I'd like to take a case home. Can I buy it? Hey, you should go up to the liquor store. We'd like to sell it there. He goes, no problem. So he went up there. And again, you guys, this is the late 70s. And he bought a case of beer and it cost him $24, $1 a bottle. You know, at that time you could buy Hubert Bach for $3.98. And Alan goes, whoa! And the guy behind the counter says, none of the customers seem to mind. And for Alan, that was an aha moment.
That's good.
So anyways, we did lose someone that was very important to our industry. Once he closed the brewery, he did get out of the industry. I believe he lived in Arkansas, if I read right today. But again, here's the guy that kind of really sort of started it all. That's why we're sitting here, perhaps, eh?
Cheers.
All right, so I guess we're just supposed to kind of talk about the glorious past. Anything we want?
Oh, just the glorious part? That won't take long.
We're done. No, Randy and I both started. You started as quality assurance tech, right?
Yes, right. Third shift lab tech.
Yep.
And the late 70s, they were hiring a lot of people, and we were part of that wave, both in the union and non-union. And I was actually the second person in QA on nights, third shift, that they ever had at the brewery, on the brewing side.
Wow.
So, which is weird, but
10 to 6, 6 days a week.
yeah, no kidding, and a wild ride, to say the least. And then Kirby, who we knew each other, we had classes together, but we didn't know each other. And let's see. Oh, I remember the interview I had with
Wayne Ripple?
With Wayne, yeah.
Yeah.
Hell of a nice guy. He passed away a few years ago.
I know, I was very bummed to hear that.
Yeah, he was a great guy, but I'm going on about my college education and in the interview, and how much work I'd done down on 3rd Street in La Crosse, tasting beer over the years. They were impressed with that.
Yeah, I actually think that was my major.
Yeah, I would have a master's in it by now. But anyway, they said, no, just we know you can do all this stuff. We're just afraid you'll get bored with it, cookbook chemistry and I said, oh God, that won't happen. And of course, 3 months later, it did happen, and I had a shot to get into the brewing side as a supervisor.
Did you start in a wash house?
I did. At that point, did you do time in a wash house?
No, I didn't. By the way, wash house was a term they used to use at breweries for the kegging operation, because all the kegs would be clean there.
Yep. And basically, they had to wash them all, and in the old days, pitch the kegs. So I went into that. Kirby came on board, and so we kind of followed each other for a while there. And when did you actually leave?
I diverged. I went to Auburndale, Florida in August of '80. You understand, at this time, Heileman was kind of an anomaly. They got to be quite large with really only one market in the United States, and that was Chicago. And 3rd Street in La Crosse, besides full of bars, was full of old-style trucks coming in empty, going out full, non-stop, day in and day out. It was quite heady times for that brewery. And they started buying up smaller breweries around the country. Blitzweiner, what was the one out of Newport, Kentucky? We could go on and on. But then they had bought a small one in Auburndale, Florida. And, you know, thanks to my parents, I got a pretty good work ethic. And they came up to me and said, would you like to go start the quality assurance department in our little brewery in Florida? Florida! Gulf Coast, baby, I'm there. Okay, this was the deep South, okay? It had nothing to do with people's vision of Florida. Oh, it was really something. The brewery was, I went from a corporate laboratory into a little wooden shack that would fit into half of this corner with cockroaches the size of beer cans. You know, rats the size of Lassie, and all these crazy Southerners that somehow hid all these big buck knives under. I don't know how they did it, and it was very interesting because again, I'd just been sitting in a laboratory doing basic stuff. I knew nothing about making beer. Okay, at that time, Jim Drysdale, who became my mentor, was a Scottish guy who brewed all over the world, and he took on the QC function, VP of QC, and so I got to work with him very closely. But I went down there and started doing my microbiological plating. It was a disaster. And I call up, Mr. Drysdale, these numbers don't look good. Can it be? Find out why. That brewery was a disaster. It was broke from A to Z. And a good way to learn how to do something is repair it. Okay, we have infected wort, we're starting here, there, what do we do? What do we do? I mean, I got a cram course in brewing in a year and a half there. I wouldn't have gotten 20 years in La Crosse or another big brewery just because everything was concentrated, and I was really into it. You guys, we had a mash tun that was made out of steel. And I saw pictures of these kind of mash tuns of old Belgian breweries, big gears in the middle with arms going out with curved rakes that would whip the mash around. It really was very different. And besides beer, we made Malta. And Malta is basically a wort, a caramel malt, and a coloring added, and some flavoring. It's hopped. It's hopped, cooled, filtered, carbonated, and packaged. So it's very sweet and rich, and it's a sticky mess and a microbiological nightmare. And so, yeah, we used to have to pasteurize that stuff at 160, and I was put in charge of a bottling line down there that on a good day did 40% efficiency. I got my ass handed to me like you would never believe. And Malta, man, I'd do QC tests, and I was told to do 30-day forcing. So that means you pull a bottle right off the filler, stick it on the shelf. So I did it with Malta. Don't do that. You open that top, man, rancid volcano of ketchup odor.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It's pretty nasty. But anyway, so yeah, Heileman actually treated me very well. I mean, it wasn't good for that company because that brewery was a disaster, but for a young guy, I also realized, hey, I really dig this. To be put in that situation and get to learn so much so quickly. I basically learned a lot of the basics of brewing from gentlemen who had spent their careers shutting down breweries on the East Coast, shutting down Schaefer, shutting down Narragansett, shutting down Portland. These were great guys, and they'd all retired down to Florida, and they shared a lot with me, and I just loved sitting down talking to them about all the old days and all the breweries and blah, 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 blah. And so to this day, I have a real strong love of American-style lagers because that's what I cut my teeth on. Your turn.
That's pretty good.
I love the sound of my voice.
I didn't do any of
that. You did plenty. Buddy.
Yeah, we were kind of stuck together for a while, and then Kirby. It's be pretty common now for somebody to jump into the brewing business, but boy, back then, nobody traveled the path that Kirby traveled with the smaller brewers. There just weren't many or almost any around. And so he went and traveled the world, and anyway, and eventually came back to Wisconsin, and we've known each other a long time. I stayed there and learned a lot the way he did. Again, a brewery that dated back into the mid to late 1800s. And we were still using a lot of the equipment, actually. So a lot like that. You learn from you know, having to replace things or repair things or make things work, you know. And then in I started out in QA, went to over to brewing a few months later, became a supervisor, was a supervisor for, I don't even know, number of years, kind of worked my way up the ladder, and then became an assistant brewmaster, and then the first assistant, senior assistant, and in May of '94, I became the brewmaster, and then hung around until 2019, and technically I'm still there. I'm there almost every day, at least for taste panel. And
The first one there.
yeah, right. You really don't leave. I just sleep in the closet. I consult for them now. So,
You know, something you really have to understand about Randy. Randy went through very challenging times as Heileman was struggling, then bought by Alan Bond, who probably would have got along well with Trump. You know that? And
yeah, no kidding.
and you know, they were really hurting there, and you were going for years, almost week to week, month to month. And Randy had to figure out. That's when a lot of people realized what we're doing at Wisconsin now, that if you have a good canning, you know, packaging capability, there's a lot of business outside of beer. But Randy was the one who had to be who developed a lot of the techniques that people use today for making NA beers, seltzers, et cetera, et cetera. So he did a lot. He had to figure out a lot of things, and people like us at our brewery now benefited from the path he carved, which I appreciate.
Yeah, we did a little and a lot of everything. And a lot of it we didn't know, things that are common knowledge now, we kind of fought our way through it and figured it out. But yeah, there were, the 80s were rough times. Went through Alan Bond, who was, you know, basically a scumbag.
Ponzi artist.
Con artist, there you go.
Yeah.
He's really familiar today, of course. But he bought us for $1.2 or $3 billion in, I don't even know, what was it, 85, 3, I don't know.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy who'd buy a place and then leverage and then raise its value and use that as an asset for collateral for his next purchase.
That's exactly right.
House of cards.
A leverage buyout, like quintessential 80s type. And I don't think he really expected us to do a whole lot. But
I don't understand. The guy was out there.
you know,
But, you know, Heileman, thinking about it, was so cool. I mean, I first started, you know, today, you know, when you're packaging beer, you know, and moving beer around, big concern is picking up dissolved oxygen. We've got very sophisticated dissolved oxygen meters today, okay? Well, when Randy and I started, and that was one of the things on third shift, is they weren't bottling at third shift then, but they were prepping for the next day. And before DO, you know, they did have a haze meter, that one with the analog.
yeah, we had the old.
Anyways, if you ever heard of a Zom bottle, what a Zom bottle is a stainless steel 12-ounce bottle that you would fill with water and put a cap on it, and it had tubes in it and a yoke that you could hook it up to a tank, and basically the tube went, oh, I can't remember, but you invert it and hook it up to a CO2 swickle and purge the bottle out, okay? Then you go hang these Zom bottles on the tank, run them back up, pull the yoke assembly off, use Hexanol in a cylinder to squeeze out 20 mils, because that was the headspace in a bottle, and then put these on an air tester. And I'm sure some of you have heard of an air testing burette, something made by Zom and Nagel. It's basically a big burette with a bubble bottom full of sodium hydroxide. And you'd pierce the crown and open a valve, and all the CO2 and other gases in there flow up into the solution. Well, carbon dioxide and sodium hydroxide form an insoluble sodium whatever it is. And you'd shake this mother, time again, until you're down to less than 10 pounds. And then the burette had markers on it for mils, and the specification was 1.2 mils of air or less per bottle. And I use those forever. In fact, in Florida, I first started using one of the guys who I worked with Didn't quite right, man. They call me Einstein. I was running a laboratory, and he'd yell at me, "Hey, Einstein, man, go get one of them zombie bottles." So I'd shake the zombie. But that was, I haven't shook a zombie in many years, and it was interesting, but I don't miss it. And then you're going up in the grain cars getting samples.
Oh, yeah.
I
wish you'd have said something about the zombie. I've got one.
Do you?
Yeah. And, of course, nobody at the brewery now has ever seen one, but they were heavy.
Oh, yeah.
And a royal pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And we'd load up a whole basket of maybe 6-8 Zom bottles, which were heavy enough empty. And then, of course, you went out and you filled them with beer. So you could really get a good workout with the Zom bottles.
Oh, yeah. It was
it was really something.
Heileman, it was going so crazy at one time. And again, you have to understand my background was totally different than anyone else in the micro. How many homebrews have I made in my life? None. Too much work. I got all this expensive equipment. So I really, where was I going to go with that? But, help me out, Randy. Oh, yeah. So I didn't, so when I was used to working in breweries, I had 600 with 1,000 barrel, 400, 500 barrel kettles. I remember walking in the Capitol and seeing the shells of the 35 barrels on the frames before we put them together. I'm going, my God, I'm going to brew on toys. That was a 35 barrel brew house, you know what I mean? But I guess everything's relative. Heileman was so interesting. It just had been added on years after years after years. What was it, 32 F cellars? Was it F the highest one?
F was the highest one, yes.
Right, they had open fermenters then. And you'd walk in that room and that thing was really fermenting and all these things were overflowing. And this was before OSHA really had too much influence. You'd get headaches in a heartbeat from all the CO2 in there. You'd have to go in there to get a volume sample on that, and man, you were holding your breath and running through. And they would purge tanks in the cellar. The purging would be always worried about the old bubbling CO2 through the beer, which isn't necessarily the best to, vent everything out of it, but knock the O and you sell it. You literally would be walking around and have cross-eyed from CO2 sometimes. But the plant was massive, and it was so interesting, and it never got over the novelty, so I just was there a couple years. But I do remember when I used to walk up to the laboratory, they had that one 300-barrel kettle that they had never used.
Oh, yeah.
And had that beautiful Granite in the corner. Well, they started having to use that because their production was so much, and I come in one day, and they were cutting this kettle apart, and I'm looking at it, and Wayne told me, you know what they're doing, Kirby? He goes, oh, they could add, and they had enough space above it to add enough room for just 40 barrels more capacity.
Yep.
In many millions of barrel brewery. Granted, they're high gravity and dilute it, but they were so desperate that 40 ended up being maybe 50, 60 barrels made a hell of a difference.
Yeah, it was a section in the kettle that was, maybe 5 feet
Yeah, this
high.
poor dome is stuck up in the cellar.
But that's what they did because they were balls to the walls and couldn't make enough. They went to high gravity brewing just before we started there.
Okay.
75 or 76, I think it was. They were pretty much straight gravity brews, with a little wiggle room in there, but just to get more volume out of the tanks they had. And they had
10 to the eighth.
They had tanks from
Everywhere.
200 barrels to the world's largest 6-pack, which were 3,600 barrels, I think.
Yeah, well, now you got 7,000 barrels. I remember Clinton, Rochelle Francois, and Quentin Holman worked with me, and we came and visited you, and they were just like overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like again, for what I considered toys, at a 35 barrel for them, it was a massive brewery back then, and to go under and stand under a 7,000 barrel tank or see a centrifuge the size of a 35 barrel brew kettle, it's quite the experience.
It's and we didn't, in La Crosse anyway, I don't know about the other plants at the time, but we didn't have a pilot plant. So we had to, people would come in with, they weren't really jumping from one brewery to another. They were more like us, home brewers. I'm not a home brewer, and I've brewed that much homebrew. And people ask me all the time, and I say, "Are you kidding?" I know how hard it is, and how messy it is, and expensive. And I said, I got nothing but big respect for you people, but I'm not going to do it at home. But yeah, these guys would come in, and we were doing probably about 4 million barrels of beer a year. 3 to 4 as a brewery. Heileman had up to, I think, 13 at one time, but probably active breweries, 11 or 12, all over the country. So they had no national brand except Colt 45 would be the closest thing. You don't do a lot of promoting with Colt 45. Old Style, of course, was Chicago's beer, and but they bought up these struggling regional brewers, which by now they're all that wave. It's all gone, and kept them on their feet, kept their brands, retained their people, pumped some finances in it to fix a few things up, and kept them going. So, I mean, we did, the National Beer of Texas, Lone Star, down in San Antonio. And up in the Northwest, we had Seattle Rainier Brewery, making Rainier, West Coast beer. Portland had Blitz Weinhard. They were making the most out there beers at the time. When they weren't really that far out there, but they, they were making some darker beers and more flavorful beers than most of the other plants were. And it was like that. Baltimore with Natty Boh, and so we had pretty much every section of the country covered a little bit with a brewery, and became, I don't know, I think number 4, the 4th largest brewery in the nation with no national brands, really. Which...
Yeah, every Christmas we got that Stein with how many barrels they're up to. And one of the things that did hurt Heileman with that strategy at one point then, because a lot of these brands that these small breweries were producing were bargain brands, you know what I mean? Basically very inexpensive, this year's, their version of Old Milwaukee, so to speak, okay? And eventually these plants, even though Heileman had put money and all that into them, they were very, very inefficient, okay? And over time, they could not run these operations enough to make money off what low margins they were working on to begin with. So they had to close a lot of them and bought all the production back to La Crosse. And the problem with that was the freight killed them. They're trying to keep these prices low with what thin margins they had, and then having to travel across country with it really ate it up. So with that, and Budweiser really eventually just clobbering Chicago.
Yeah, we had Russ Cleary, bless his heart. I think he had one. He had kind of a big mouth, and he kept he kept poking the big guys, Budweiser and Miller, and how big they were and how small we were, and we were competitive, and finally they just said, okay, we got to get rid of these people, and they cut prices and we had nowhere to go, because we had quality beer that was at least on a par with their beers, if not better, at much lower prices. And but when they cut their prices, we had nowhere to go. So we lost a lot of volume there, and so it was it was just erosion for a number of years, and we gradually closed some of these plants and consolidated some of the brands into La Crosse. And I don't know, years back, and I wish I'd have kept a copy of this, but I saw a typed sheet of paper with all the brands that Heileman owned or had the rights to. And of course they weren't producing all of them, but they owned them. And it was two sides of a sheet of paper with small print. It was well over 100 different labels, and most I'd heard of, but a lot I didn't hear of too. But it was just crazy. But they were the ones that were keeping these regional brands out there, because without the regional brands, you had a handful of humongous brewers more or less making the same damn beer. So it was boring as hell. And I forget where I'm going to on this. I'm lucky I'm even here. But volume started to decline. We went through a lot of hands, and in 1996, Stroh bought us, we were part of that middle tier. So you had the big three at the top, you had Bud Miller Coors, but then you had a strong middle tier that acted as an anchor to hold the big guys back from, doubling their prices and stuff. We had good beers at reasonable prices. And the middle tier consisted of, us, Heileman, Pabst, Stroh, a couple of others.
Where would like Genesee and Utica Club fit in there?
They were just on the lower end of that. The good volume, but they weren't they weren't by any, they weren't nearly as big as the big ones in the middle. Schlitz, yeah, there's a story. Schlitz. Schlitz. That's Schlitz is the reason Bud is number one, or was number one. They like so many operations, beer or anything else, the wrong people at the companies got their fingers in it, accountants, and they messed up their beer and had to stop production. They were number one by a fair,
I think AB
a fair
and Bud
piece.
flip-flop in the 50s.
Yep, and that would have been, And in the 50s, I think I saw a chart, Heileman was like 52nd largest brewery in the nation, 52nd. And that's, but back then, you still had breweries that came from pre-Prohibition, and breweries, the regional brewers were, in the 1800s, beer didn't travel until refrigeration came. And then beer got legs. But that's why every little burg had at least one brewery.
I've got to interrupt quick to say something about this because it's a great little story. Seriously, Randy makes a good point, because basically as the larger breweries saturated their market, they wanted to keep growing. And so basically pasteurization did start, I forget exactly when it started, but back then you would be loading beer by hand into buckets on chains that would go through water to soak it and ship it on railroad cars. But as these larger breweries, Anheuser-Busch, for example, was selling beer further afield, freight, all right, it costs money. And so they wanted to keep their margins the same, so they were shipping it, so they decided they'd have to add a shipping premium, i.e., let's say 10, 15 cents a six-pack, okay? Granted, you got consumers way out and around, they had their old brewery forever, all of a sudden this new stuff's coming, it's a little bit more expensive, but it's premium. And so premium had a quality, aspect associated with it. And so, hell, this beer gotta be better, it costs 25 cents more, six-pack shit. That shipping premium.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard that.
We had to basically go into, wow, it's better beer because it's just premium. It costs more, it's got to be better. I'm done.
Oh, okay. You're supposed to give me a little better lead-in on that. Anyway, so we were declining, and it was when Stroh came along, of course, they were struggling too, and lost a lot of volume. But they had picked up some beers. They picked up, they were doing Schlitz in the last Schlitz brewed the old way being maybe the late 70s way, which probably wasn't the 60s way, but we were making it in La Crosse, and damn, it was a decent beer. Had good hop character, so they screwed it all up, but towards the end, we were doing pretty well with it, and making a good product. Pabst has it now, and La Crosse is making Schlitz again after all these years. Yes.
Comes around, comes around.
Pabst has moved a bunch of their production to St. Louis.
Was it St. Louis or San Antonio?
Well, that I can't tell you. It's Anheuser-Busch. So
Yeah. I could not believe it when I heard AB was going to, God, how the mighty have
yeah,
changed.
we had a discussion on that because, boy, back in the day, they wouldn't have had room to pick up, volume like that, but they certainly, yeah. Yeah, it was a shock when they stepped forward with that. But so we're back in the hands of beer people, Stroh, and we're making, and we got we had the last operating Flammkessel in the maybe the world, I don't know, but. The last one for Stroh, who, their big lead-in was fire brewed. It was all fire brewed, and I thought, well, that's just marketing BS. But it really wasn't. It was an actual process, and it did change the flavor profile of the beer. It's a way of heating up the beer, and we had these big copper. The Flammkessel was a vertical tower with a big copper coil going up through it, and it was heated with gas jets on the outside. So unlike most of us, maybe all of us, that use steam, the interface between the wort and the heating surface, instead of being maybe 230 or 40 degrees with pressurized steam, would have been several hundred degrees. So you got caramelization, you got color development, and to be honest, at the time, the Schlitz and Stroh were the same beers in the brew house, except for the
flame actions.
Except for the Flammkessel.
How often did that happen? Well, sorry. Did you parse the batch into multiple brands?
Well, that was pretty. Again, when they take on some of these brands, and they have their own unique recipe and process, but when you're consolidating. And you really start picking them apart, again, they were all American lagers, and there wasn't a lot of difference between a lot of them. So that's typically how they combined them. They would have a value stream, decent beer at a decent price, then they would have a premium level, and then super premium.
And that costs 50 cents more to ship.
Yeah, right. And, well, of course, light beer didn't come around really until the 80s. We didn't do any in La Crosse until the early 80s.
The first light beer was actually done by Rheingold out of New York. I worked with a guy I've been to Brewmaster. He was a plant manager in Auburndale, and it was called Gablinger or something like that. Yes. And the ad for it was a very big gentleman with a big plate of spaghetti and a wife beater. Drinking his light beer. I don't think that campaign worked too well. Wasn't until Miller got a hold of it. But I think it went to Peter Hannon, and I think Miller got that from Peter Hannon. Peter Hannon was a Chicago brewery.
Yep.
I always wanted to know, what's so special about Special Export?
Well,
it was a ding-dang darn good beer.
at the time, and you got to remember that Special Export came out in 41 or 42. It's hard to remember back that far, especially since I wasn't born. I feel like I was there, but it was called Special Export because it had a European character to it, and most of the beers were, fairly pale versions of old school European lagers. Well, the green bottle, yeah.
Yeah, well, understand, it's supposed like, old style and the buds of the world were probably in 11.4, Plowder range, original gravity.
Yep.
Export was 12.
Yeah.
And instead of corn for an adjunct, it used rice, and I believe it used spalt hops in it, didn't it?
They use what?
Did it use spalt in it?
Yes. They used Spalt, Hallertau, and Tettnang. And it had more character. It was more refined. It did have adjuncts, but it was rice. And the rice, while adding, fermentables, didn't really change the flavor all that much, whereas corn grits had a slightly bigger impact on the finished product. And the malt adjunct ratio was, it was much higher malt ratio than
Right.
most of the American lagers at the time, which were pretty much 60-40. Export was 70-30, I think, or maybe
Here's
higher
quiz
than that.
time. Quiz time. Okay, basically American standard lagers, one of the hallmarks of it is adjuncts, okay? Corn grits, rice, corn syrup and that. Why did that happen? As we headed west as a nation and started growing our own barley for malting, it wasn't very good. It had a lot of husk, not a whole lot of endosperm, and made for a very harsh and pleasant beer. But brewers, being pretty fucking smart, realized that the enzymic power in a barley corn could work to catalyze the breakdown of starch above and beyond the starch that was in a barley corn. So we learned that if you took these cereal grains and they went through their own process of mashing that ended up with a boil, you'd literally explode the granules of starch was encased in let's say, corn grits, and added it to the main mash, and those starch became another target for the enzymes to tell you got to start breaking down. And what it did was it cut the harshness of the malted barley we were growing, back in the 1800s, and made for a much more pleasant, easy to drink beer.
Yes, and people loved it because a lot of people wanted something. Beers were pretty meaty back then, and it offered a point of difference. They were a bit milder, smoother,
Crisper, more refreshing.
crisper,
blah, blah, blah.
more refreshing. Yeah, and became huge, obviously, and and then it went everywhere from there.
We're nuts.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you something. I get the biggest kick. Now we have Mexican lagers, French pilsners, Italian pilsners, and blah, blah, blah. Are you kidding me? What those are is international versions of the American standard lager. Because let's face it, breweries, how do you mass market something? What do you want the product to do? To offend the least number of people possible. And so we started making these. I mean, Americans, I heard in first micro, American beer quality is crap. Bullshit. The best definition of quality I've ever heard is the product does what it's supposed to do. And quite frankly, American breweries did set world standards of how to make quality product. In other words, it was stable in the package and represented itself well on the shelf. And so the milder a beer was, the more people could drink it easy enough and not form a strong opinion one way or the other. You could, learn how to market, advertise, and sell similar products just based due to your marketing expertise. And again, you go to breweries all over the world. In fact, I worked at a brewery in the Philippines. I was making an American-style lager with a German name, Beerhausen, under a Scottish brewer in the Philippines. And basically, it was just an American lager, pretty good one too, Beerhausen.
Yeah, it really opened the door for everybody to start enjoying beer. It was mostly men back in 1800s and before, and when they came out with something with a bit of a lighter, more palatable profile, it really brought women and younger people, into the beer target, and it really started to take off. And then, of course, with refrigeration in whatever 1880, then it started to travel, and then that's when you started to see the competition really go up, because instead of selling to the 150 people within 10 miles of your brewery, you were selling it to people maybe 1,000 miles away, and got pretty competitive. And Old Style actually came out in 1902, and Gottlieb Heileman and John Gund, another old school lacrosse brewer, got together in the early 1850s and started their brewery, and it was called City Brewery. That's why we went back to that name. Of course, it's far too generic, but that's the way it was. And then Gunn split off, and he went down the street. Actually, it was kind of Brewer's Row there. Our brewery, if you've been past it, is pretty much right in the middle of La Crosse now. Yeah. And it was, kind of on the fringes back in the day, and so was Gund. But by the time Prohibition rolled around, Gund was the big La Crosse brewery, and Heileman was, in there, but not nearly what Gund was. And big shakeout with Prohibition. The Gund family tried a few things, non-alcoholic things, and then they just decided, of course they didn't know how long it was going to go on. Maybe it was a forever thing. It should have been a never thing. Yeah. Yeah, so they sold their brands. They had the Peerless brand and some other.
Peerless, yeah.
Peerless was the big one, though. Mm-hmm. Great name for a beer. And so Peerless was made in La Crosse by the Mitchell family, the Michaels, actually. And they were up the other side of the street from us at their brewery. So they made Peerless from post-Prohibition until into the 50s, and then it just went away, I guess, with the brewery, which is weird because now, we probably would have bought it. But I actually know some of the people from some of the last owners of the Gun brand were the Michael family, and I had a chance to see a book that their, great-great-grandfather or uncle had when he was at the brewery, big, thick tome like this, all handwritten in German with recipes, and it's quite a piece. And I thought he was going to resurrect the brand there for a while. They own the brand, but he never did anything with it. Yeah, I know. I know.
Here's the thing about Heileman. I started working there. A little bit south of the brewery on the same street they're on, they had their own maltings operation. So Heileman was probably one of the last good-sized breweries in this country to be doing their own malting.
Probably, yeah.
And this, again, would have been back in 1978. What was the name of the VP? I think Cleary married his daughter.
Oh, Jesus.
It was kind of a curmudgeon.
Yeah. Because that narrows it down to about 40% of them. Alan Han.
Oh, no, Alan Han. I worked with Alan in the Philly. He was a buddy of Drysdale's.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it was, damn it.
Alan Han, again, folks, what obviously makes life go round is working among a lot of interesting characters, okay? Well, Alan Hand, they hung him in effigy once. The union didn't look across during a big strike.
Oh, he was
Oh, he was a piece of work.
hated by the union, and of course he hated the union. And they tried to break it, and there were so many shenanigans going on with Alan Hand there that it's hard to even talk about all of them. But shit, no, it wasn't. You're right. It wasn't him. I can see the guy, and I can't think of.
All I know is that I was told by the brewers
John Slike.
Yes, that the yield off the Heileman malt wasn't so as good
It was
as
terrible. Jesus. Yeah, we had our own malting facility, but I don't think we had anybody who really knew. Well, and the thing about Slike was he was a VP for Heileman. I keep forgetting him being recorded. Not that that has ever stopped me from saying stuff, but he was a piece of work. I know he was buying barley that he was telling the Heileman uppers that it was like the best quality malting barley out there. 6-row, of course, back in those days, which was the cheap barley. But hell, it couldn't have been much better than feedlot barley, to be honest. And the
price was right.
Oh God! And then we had these old broken down cars that were all rusted shut or rusted open, and we were supposed to make quality beer with this stuff. And fortunately, we had maybe one car a week from our own plant.
I do remember those cars. Understand, one of the things when both Randy and I are on third shift, one of your jobs was to go inspect the grain cars. Whether it was so much fun when it was 25 below. But you'd open up the tops, and so a lot of them had phostoxin in it, which is a pesticide. It's not what you call human friendly. It's dangerous stuff. If you get it wet, it starts on fire.
It'll blow up.
You have to take the phostoxin out, put it in a pail, and then put these spears in there and get samples. And yeah, I love the Laddish. Actually, in Jefferson, Wisconsin, had a company called Laddish that made great malt.
That was the best barley or best
and the rail
malt
cart
we
was
could
so
buy.
nice. They're easy to open. Yeah, and then the Heilemans come up there. Oh man, yeah, I do remember that now.
Yeah, and geez, the runoffs were terrible. Extraction was inconsistent. There were just so many things wrong. Hazy beer with it, and if we'd have had all of that, I think we, as a company, we would have collapsed. I'm sure, because I don't think we could have covered all that up with.
You hear that? You've been the first brewery to make hazy hip.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, everything had to be just sparkling.
Oh yeah,
clean back then.
Double filtration, putting in the FTU meter, and man, if that beer wasn't crystal clear, you were in trouble if you let that get through.
Yep.
It's one thing that's been a little bit easier about craft. People are a little more tolerant to that.
Yeah, that's true. That's one of the good things.
One of the ways you would keep beer clear back then is, there are not necessarily proteins, just high molecular weight nitrogen compounds that, as the beer oxidate, they join together and get big enough where you can see. Well, the smaller these tidbits of this molecule would be, the longer it takes to get large enough to see. So you'd use papain, which is from the papaya plant, to break these compounds into smaller forms. But this is also the type of, a lot of these proteins in there were important for foam. So you use papain, sure you had clear beer, now you have any foam. What do you gotta do? You gotta add foam stabilizers. So it became kind of a vicious progression into the use of additives. Although our good friend George Arnold
Yes.
went and got his master's in England, and he told me he learned when he went to get to brewing school in England, that the British have never met an additive they haven't liked. I thought that was a great line.
I think I heard him say that, and I can believe it. It really started out, across the pond, but we added a number of things. We didn't add foam enhancers, but we added foam stabilizers, it kept enough of the good proteins around to give you a decent head on your beer, because it wasn't like the old beers that were all brewed with barley, malted barley. These were adjunct beers to a certain degree, and of course the only thing they provide to the game is carbohydrates, and which are broken down into sugars. And the British, on the other hand, if back then anyway, I have no idea how it is now, it's probably different, but if you poured a beer and it had more than like a 1/4-inch head on it, they sent it back and had them top it up. They didn't want any foam on it.
And now you have milk holes. Have you seen those?
What?
Are they Czechoslovakian in origin? It's basically a glass. You get poured a glass that's about 3/4 foam. Yeah. And it's called a Milko. I guess.
Go to working class.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Anyway, so that was a big issue back then. You had to have clear beer, but you still had to have a nice head that with lacing and head retention. Of course, we measured head retention. If you look up the ASBC method for it, it's in there for measuring it.
Yeah, I've done that.
You have to have acid wash glassware. Really, the reason that most beer doesn't have a head on it now is poor cleaning of the glasses in your establishments. So once I get a glass broken in, I have them stick with that glass, and because I've got it ready to go. And the second beer has always got better cling and head development.
And by the fourth, you don't care.
Yeah. Then I want it filled right to the top.
You know, I like collecting old, I haven't done it for a long time, but old shut down Wisconsin beer glasses. I love them, but I use them. I broke a lot of history.
Yeah, me too. I've got a lot of them, but I use them.
That's what they're
beer
for.
Glasses.
You know, the Florida experience for me was really cool, and Heileman, you know, it was kind of the beginning of the end. In fact, because what they needed to get into the southern market, so that's why they bought this little brewery in Florida, which, if you really look at it, was ludicrous. You know, it was pretty small for what they're. I mean, the brewery had a 300-barrel brew house. It did about 100,000 a year. But if you're looking at 14, 15 million barrel a year operation, who knows? But they did buy Perry, Georgia from Pabst, and Pabst at one time had built a brewery down in Perry, Georgia, and also had a can plant attached. When this brewery was going to go into Perry, which is pretty much in the Bible Belt, people were in the streets protesting the devil's liquid that was going to come to town. But then they found out how much a place was going to pay. Oh yeah, bring it!
Yeah.
But I interviewed there after I got back from the
really?
Philippines. Yeah, but the night before, at the hotel, it was the only place in town you could get a beer. And I saw a bunch of these sales guys I got to know in Auburndale. Man, I went into that interview hung over to the point of bleeding from my ears. I don't think I got the job because of that. And in retrospect, thank God.
It was a big brewery too.
Yeah, it was.
I think bigger. It would have been the biggest one in the corporation at the time. Physically, they weren't putting out the most beer, but we had the Schmidt plant up in St. Paul, so we had the Midwest covered very well. As a matter of fact, when I started there, I lived in Sparta. I'm from Sparta, Wisconsin, and I still lived in Sparta, and drove in, every evening for the night shift. And I told this, I can't even tell you how many times. The interstate system was, fairly new back then, and I swear, I was never out of sight of a old-style semi heading to Illinois. One would pass me.
I believe
and
that.
And I would see another one coming, and it was every night. And it was cans, bottles, full loads of kegs. They'd line load kegs back in the day. And at the time, Illinois, i.e. Chicago, accounted for 41% of all the beer that was made in La Crosse.
Wow.
Had what?
What do you say?
Breaks or after, or did they have?
Oh, shift beers. Shift
Oh.
beers? Are you kidding? These fuckers were drinking all night long. Second shift when I got in that was notorious.
Oh, that was the one, if you were young and single, that's the one you wanted.
Oh my
because
God. No, they used to, everyone remember Black's Cream Ale in little 7-ounce bottles?
I could eat
All right, they'd
another
run
beer.
those.
Get
And
dry.
Randy, could you grab me a Badger Club, please?
Oh, what?
A Badger Club?
Oh, Badger Club. Yep.
I'd say kiss the list, but I hate IPAs. Anyways,
Take one of those.
they would get a wheelbarrow and load it up with these 7
Yeah,
ounces
there you
and
go.
just start pounding. I don't know how
Back
they
in
got
my
away
heyday.
with it. Strong union, but no.
Yeah,
They
thanks.
can't anymore, but it used to be, beers whenever you want. And by the way, have all you guys seen the letter that Feuerbach had posted on the wall of his brewery about drinking? It's in Peter's book. I don't know if you can find it online. Maybe you can if you go Feuerbach, but it was a sign that the Feuerbach patriarch had put on his put on the wall of the break room about drinking on the job, and it's phenomenal. It's one of the funniest things I've ever read. So that's your assignment to go check that out.
I've got the book. I haven't cracked it open. I just got it
Oh, I've got
from
I haven't seen Peter for a
Peter
while.
recently. Yeah, there's not many of the old timers anymore around out there, but there's a few. And,
No, again, that's
good,
that was
good
for me
stories.
I've learned so much from these guys. I remember there was a Schlitz brewer, the assistant brewer. Schlitz had built a brewery in Tampa, which now is Yuengling. Mm-hmm. And the brewmaster knew Joe Johnson, who was the second plant manager / brewmaster in Florida. And he came with and he bought his assistant, who was an old Schlitz guy. What a character. He had marched in Hitler's army. But I don't think he took it too serious for the nature of his personality. But he would come up and just the stories he had. And he was the kind of guy that if he woke up in the middle of the night to pee, he didn't want to waste that effort. So he'd go to the bathroom and sit down and have a couple beers and then go back to bed. Yeah, that's a beer guy.
Yeah, drinking in the brewery? Hell, yeah.
I
Matter
saw
of fact,
one,
it was...
one guy, here's a story for you. One of the smaller kettles, well, there was a 600 barrel kettle next to the one we were talking about how they put that side on for 40 barrels. And I can't remember this guy's name, but I don't believe it showed the strength of the union that he still had a job. And I think it was on one of the Black's Cream Ale nights. He walked away from the kettle boiling. Back then there was no automatic controls. Basically you kept an eye on the thing. And he walked away, and all of a sudden, it was right above where the laboratory was. I'm hearing yelling and screaming, and I look, and I can't see out the windows. This is a 600 barrel kettle. This guy walked away from it, and we used to call it kettle puking. When it overboiled, this thing became a volcano. It was coming out so bad they couldn't get to the emergency.
Well, it's got like a
panic
24-inch stream of boiling water launching out of it.
600 barrel kettle, he boiled out 200 barrels of it. Why? Well, because he was drunk. But he was protected. But man, what a mess that was. That was an accomplishment.
Was that Ron? That wasn't Ron Ingham.
No. Ron he was the head of the union. He used to come in at there Friday night sometimes, and he had a few pops in him from going out for fish fry.
Oh, yeah.
And we used to drop the grits in the cereal cooker. You had to pull this plate out. He'd forget to, and all of a sudden you'd have 6,000 pounds of grits laying on the floor. Whole lot of shoveling going on.
There really were no restrictions on drinking. I mean,
Yeah.
it was supposed to be during breaks, but the cool man was right outside the lab door, and we had an old Coke cooler, which, by the way, I have.
You have that?
I have it. It doesn't work. I'd have to get it fixed.
Oh man, it'd be worth it. It was the best beer cooler. It was an old Coca-Cola cooler with and it had a chiller in it, cold water. It was the greatest thing for cooling down beer quick in the world. I
Yep.
can't believe you have that.
Yeah, they replaced it finally, and
They fucked up. That thing was too cool.
yeah.
Oh,
Well,
man, Randy.
Yeah, I'll send you a picture sometime. Well, you know what it looks like. It's an old Coke cooler. Anyway, where he stood was right outside the door when he was cooling a wort over to the fermentation cellars, and Ron was a big guy.
Yeah.
A really big guy, and beet red and just sweating profusely, and he'd walk quietly into the lab. He'd have his radio with him, so he's in contact. Walk back to the Coke cooler, take one out, open it. They're all bottles, obviously. Pry off, duh. And I swear he drank that bottle in like 2 gulps and just turned around and went back out to his job. But yeah, there were a lot of headaches with that. And to show you how bad or good or however you want to read it, it was the company and union actually had to put it in the union book that, now get this, nobody shows up for work early or stays late. Whistle blows, I mean, you're out of there. They've had to put it in the contract that no one could come in or stay after in their shift more than 15 or 20 minutes, enough to pass off information. Because some of the guys were coming in or staying over an hour, 2 hours.
A whole shift?
Yeah. And they were causing problems because they were they were really drunk then. But yeah, so they had to make it illegal for them to even stay. So because there was no limit on it. And there were some of the old timers who actually, their wives did not know how much vacation they actually got. They got 7 weeks, and I'm sure a lot of wives thought they got 4 or 5. And boy, when they found out that's not what it was, they'd take a week off, get up, go to work, drink all day, and then go home. And wives never knew the difference. And yeah, anyway.
Those were the days.
Yeah, and most of the wives, came in and picked up the checks, which they could get on Thursday, because then they could get them, well, first of all, it didn't all get spent on booze and beer. They got some spending money for the house that way. And the guys didn't need to buy beer anyway. They were drinking it at work.
I'll tell you something, nothing is actually more fun than being going to one of the bars that was close to the brewery at Friday payday at the end of 3rd shift. It was a riot. Now, thinking of that old brew house, everyone here has heard of a lauter tun, for separating the grain from the wort, or a mash filter. You guys, when we first started, Heileman was using a strain master.
Yes.
And I'm not really sure how that worked. I think AB might have invented it.
It's from AB originally, and it was supposed to, of course, speed up the process or something. But the wort was
a lot of lipids, I think.
It was there was a lot of haze in it, and
but yeah, I think it was a 45-minute shot for a 600-barrel brew through there.
God, I can't remember. That sounds about right. I've only ever seen one other one, and that's when I got to the. Where was I? Where the hell was I? Longview, Texas, I think, under Stroh. And I walk in, I see this big stainless steel loaf of bread there, and I said, I know what that is.
That's about it. Looks like a big loaf. And I understand with a big brewery, such as Heileman, where you're taking a spent grain out, there's still some extract in there, out, right? They would get dropped out of the strain master. Literally, you'd have Bombay doors, and it just boom, down it'd go, and into a centrifuge. And so it would centrifuge, I believe it was, or some kind of decanter.
Yes, we had Alpha Laval decanters, which spun a lot of the wort out of the
grain, correct.
Out of the grain, and then on top of that, it went through a centrifuge to get more of it out.
All right.
It was quite a process.
And what they were all doing that for is, when you're a brewery that size, you're dumping, there's a lot of extract left in that grain, and they would call it sweet water because it still had some sweet maltiness to it, and they would use that to mash subsequent brews.
Yeah.
So it's just a way to squeeze more extract and a little more profit out of a brew.
Yeah. And
I'm going to tell you something. That's a very good question, and I've heard that, forever. You get that wort too low, you're going to have tannic, it's going to be harsh. Your beer's going to suck. It was never a problem.
No, we didn't draw the we really didn't draw the the grain beds down much, so we had a pretty good control on it, and it only took it down to a certain degree even with the centrifuges. Of course, it was a cleaning nightmare, and eventually it went away, and some brewers dried their grain. In the old days, Heileman actually even dried their grain, but that's before me, or before us. And
when I worked in the Philippines, the guy who owned the brewery had a bunch of companies, and one was a farm for growing pigs. Pork's very popular over there. So the spent grain, they bought all these dryers to dry the spent grain and transport it to the pig farm. They never got them to work, but the room these dryers in was massive, so they'd spread the grain out on the floor, okay? Smells wonderful, but you'd walk in there and all of a sudden you realize the whole floor was moving. It was covered with flies. I didn't go there too often.
yeah.
Did you guys use exogenous enzymes then?
What's that?
Throwing enzymes into the mash to get a little more?
Yeah. Mostly that really didn't happen unless you had a really messed up brew, or when light beers came along. Then there was a lot more enzyme usage. And now with you can make a neutral malt base, which is used, is brewed and then processed down to low gravity or low. Kirby's looking at me. Basically, it's a brew that tries not to be a beer.
Randy was making brews initially where you had 1,000 pounds of malt and 1,000 barrel lauter tun. Well, you had like 2 millimeters of malt in the bottom of that or something.
But it was even.
All for taxation. But when Randy mentioned about enzymes you just talked about, I've got a story I just love about those. And this again goes back to Rheingold and the first light beer, Gablinger, okay? And what you're doing, we usually make light beers, you make a very low OG beer, okay, 6.5 to 7. And then as the wort was being cooled, you would add an enzyme to it, an alpha enzyme of sort, that would break down the dextrins and fermentable sugars, and you end up with a negative fermentation, meaning you get a liquid that is less dense than water. All right, back in Rheingold days, you pay a lot of tax on beer, you ship it out, and sometimes you get beer that goes bad or is old or something, you bring it back. In Rheingold, for their keg beer, I believe it was, they had a big holding tank. And all these return kegs, it had to be nasty. They'd put it in this tank, and when it got to a certain level, write down how many barrels were in there, and then dump it and send it in for tax, okay? So we used to get audited a lot by the ATF, now it's called a TTB, not as much as we used to.
Yeah.
But the guy came in checking the place out one day and saw that tank, and he goes, well, I want to make sure you guys aren't cheating, putting water in there. So they got a sample of beer, got the hydrometer, spun it, boom, it disappeared. This guy starts accusing him. Everyone's going, what the hell? The enzyme that came back from the kegs and light beer started breaking on the dextrins, so when this ATF guy, stuck it in, the liquid was less dense than water, the hydrometer disappeared, and there was a lot of noise made, I guess.
Yeah. Broke a lot of hydrometers that way, I'm guessing, which were very expensive back in the day.
I didn't need any of those to break hydrometers. I excelled at that also.
Yeah, well, he mentioned Blatz Light Cream Ale, which again, wasn't that special of a beer, but it had a different character to it, and it was back before craft beers, late 70s, very early 80s, and really the big selling point came in these green 7-ounce long neck bottles. And they called them pocket rockets. And
did you ever notice you can drink 2 7-ounces quicker than 1 12-ouncer? It's just how it works.
And they were handy. You could just shove them in your pockets and take them anywhere. And
in college, we called those the Green Death because you drank too many.
Yeah. But the guys in packaging, on the days when we would be packaging cream ale, they had some sort of a code, and they would call over the PA system, and they'd give this code. You know, it's kind of like a code in a hospital or something, except good.
Code toss pot.
Well, and then everybody knew to, grab some and squirrel it away somewhere. So as a supervisor for the next week and a half, our jobs were to go behind every single tank in that place, and there's a lot of them, hundreds, and look for their stashes. And because they put them in the cellars, they wouldn't want to drink it warm.
Cold and damp. And
We'd find, full cases of cartons there were 8-pack cartons of 7 ounce, 4 to a case, or 4 to a case. So you get 32 7 ounces in a case, and years after that, and in the City Brewery days, somebody, a plumber or something, brought it to my office, and he had 3 or 4 of these, and he said, "Well, what are these?" I said, "Okay, where'd you find them?" Well, he found them stashed somewhere. We never looked, so that's where they sat for.
they probably sat like some of those
decades.
old Capital bottles that Bob bought in.
Decade, yeah, probably. But so that was they loved that, and there were employee beer sales all the time, and short fills, wrong crowns, flagging labels, crooked labels, and they'd sell it to employees, and there'd be a limit anywhere from 1 case per employee to maybe 10, if they had a big mess up. And the tavern league hated it, because the brewers, even if they really didn't drink beer, were buying their case of beer, and they'd be anywhere from maybe $2 to maybe $5 a case at the top end.
It's not bad.
So not bad. And then they were turning around selling it to their buddies, and the tavern league just was going nuts over it. So they were happy to see that go away too.
League.
But there were always employee beer sales all the time.
So again, just from my standpoint, it started there in 1978, and to see what happened to that brewery, which I loved, you know what I mean, and how it struggled, but it's still there. But to see what's happened to the industry, you guys. Because understand, when Randy and I started, the number I tend to use, because I kind of researched it, that in the late 70s, we were down to 61 buildings in this country owned by 41 companies making beer. And Wisconsin was a bright spot. We had 7, all right? So we had basically come to, basically the beer in this country was nothing but premium beer and light beer. We were a beer desert. And it was interesting talking about McAuliffe and guys like that. They basically, the spark was there from those guys, and eventually it just caught fire like you wouldn't believe. But some of the stories I've heard about the beginnings of craft, and one of my favorite has to do with a friend of mine, because he told it to me. And this was back, and it's going to show you how much flavor perception has changed since the advent of the microbreweries, craft breweries, whatever you want to call them. And this would have been back in the early 80s. My friend's name is Bob August, and he was working at one of these newfangled startup little microbreweries in the West Coast, okay? And he heard about, there's an organization, I've never belonged to it, the Master Brewers Association of America. So many times I go to those meetings, it seems full of people that want to sell me shit. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's true.
But anyways, Bob went to this meeting because there's a 2-volume book, Malting and Brewing Science, one of the classics, all right, written by 3 British guys, and one of the authors, a Dr. Young, I forget his first name, was going to be there and give a nice talk and then taste everyone's beers. And this is back at a time when Olympia, Rainier, Lucky Lager, all these, West Coast lagers tend to be milder in the first place. Well, Bob bought his beer in, all right? So it's beer drinking time. This guy's tasting all his beers, and Bob's sitting at a table. All of a sudden, he hears this British voice screaming, "Who on earth bought this god-awful over-the-top hop stuff that has destroyed my palate. And Bob goes, that be me? This guy just laid into him. What are you guys thinking? This is terrible. It's way out of balance. It's whack. No one's going to buy it. I hope you go out of business. You suck. You've destroyed my palate. What was the beer? Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. All right, now today, that's considered pretty mild in terms of hoppy beers. And I will say, I do think that Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is an absolute world-class beer. It is absolute American classic. It is one of the beers on the planet. But Bob told me that story, and I think I laughed for a month. I thought it was so funny, but so true.
Yep.
You know, how much things changed in this, you know, since you and I started in '78 to where we are today. I mean, when I started at Capitol, the hop suppliers, you could get maybe 15 types of hops, okay? Mainly domestic and some German ones. All right, go online and look up hops today. There's about, 1,000 varieties it seems? I don't know, it's just amazing. Every day they keep coming and coming and coming, you know, due to the advent of the popularity of the American India Pale Ale. And again, it's just one of those things that's changed, and over years that astounds me. I mean,
If you got a new variety, one every 5 years, that was a lot.
I used to get lectured by guys like Mark Kesnick, who used to be part of the organization here, like, you need to make hoppier beer. No! I'm a lager person. We're going to be I want to be a German-style beer, and that's, you know, in my heart and soul today, I prefer classic European-style beers, mainly Germanic lagers. I can choke down an IPA and regret it for about a month after I have one. I don't drink very many IPAs, and granted, they're good. It's just not my, you know, my type of beer. How I got involved with Capitol, by the way, was I was, you know, from Heileman, I was working down at Auburndale. I had mentioned a Scottish guy, his name was Jim Drysdale, who brewed all over the world. Yep. And he basically got tired of him, and he came over and was QC VP for Heileman overall. And he got tired of the American corporate life, and Alan Hand had somehow gotten his fingers in this brewery in the Philippines. And Jim and Drysdale worked together, so he invited Drysdale over there. And I got the call down in Auburndale, he wanted to come start this QC thing, you know, which I did, of course, and it was very interesting. I even gave August Bush III a taste test on the, in the penthouse of this brewery.
Oh, wow.
Tasting their beers, yeah, because they were looking at making Bud there, and eventually they did. And ironically, the Philippines, which admired all things American, Bud never really took off there. You know, we were actually over there, this guy, the Philippines are full of Chinese that migrated when Mao took over, okay, and got the hell out of there. And they've been very successful, and this one gentleman, Lucio Tan, had started a tobacco company, ironically called Fortune, because that's what it turned into, and started all these businesses and decided he's going to take on the San Miguel beer empire, okay? San Miguel was the only brewery in the Philippines. It started in the Philippines, and well, it's got about at least 11 breweries throughout the world, or it had. Anyways, and they were brutal. Post-World War II, a guy came in and started a new brewery to take on San Miguel, and he was importing all the bottles. They were all returnables. Okay, so San Miguel hired a bunch of flunkies who will go out and get the empty cases and break the bottles. They put this poor guy out of business. So Lucio Tan started Asia Brewery. What did he build on premise?
Bottle plant.
A bottle plant. I went from Auburndale, which was small by brewery standards, to a brewery that basically took up a footprint the size of Middleton and Verona put together, the town, so it was huge. And they made their own bottles and all that, and it was a very interesting experience. And I saw some things there that were just, you'd probably never heard of. Anyone here ever heard of glass laminate? Okay, what that is, the bottles have kind of an alkaline coating on the inside, and if a bottle sits unused and unfilled when it's new for a long time and moisture gets in there, a chemical reaction happens, and there's a film that forms on the inside of the bottle when you put beer into it and cap it and put it through the pasteurizer, it looks like a snow globe. All this stuff comes flying off. To start this brewery, they had bought 10 million bottles from a glass supplier in Thailand that they never used. And then they had to start using them, and all of a sudden, what the hell is this? It was glass laminate. And they had tons of bottles. What are we going to do? Hydrofluoric acid at 5% gets rid of that. Being stupid, I went to the glass plant once to get some hydrofluoric acid, and I bought a glass container. And they filled it for me. As I'm walking, all of a sudden this glass is getting hotter and hotter. I'm going, you dumb. Sprinted to the brewery. By the time I got some ass out and the bottle fell apart. But what we did, they had equipment, they had a boneyard like they wouldn't believe from all these breweries they bought up to save money with equipment. So they started setting up a bunch of bottle rinsers, and we put these bottles through twist rinsers and hit it with this 5% hydrofluoric, and it'd make them good. You wouldn't believe how many cages. That stuff chewed through welds like you wouldn't believe. And then some poor guy, he used to check the sprays with his hand. Burrows through it into the bone, and you get a bone infection. Yeah, you know, that's the kind of stuff when you get into a brewery you never really think about. You know, glass laminate. I will tell you my fondest memory of the Philippines, by the way. Working there, it had nothing to do with beer. This was before phone communication was difficult. So we wrote letters. My wife and I wrote letters from here to the ceiling, probably. And we took our dogs with us. And parts of the Philippines, they eat dogs. So when Drysdale said we needed dog meat, there was real confusion about what was in the freezer when we got there. But anyways, one day Barbara's outside, it's my wife, with our dogs, sunning, and I'm in there, and one of the few days didn't need air conditioning, and I'm writing letters, and I'm listening to James Brown live at the Apollo. And all of a sudden I hear screaming, and I'm going, I've never heard this on that tape. Well, it's Barbara. And I looked outside, and she's got one of her dogs, Watson. We used to name our dogs after Sherlock Holmes characters. And she's pulling on him, screaming, and I thought he had a kitten. All of a sudden I saw, the dog had jumped a Philippine cobra. And so it was nose to nose with this hood friend doing this shit. I'm going, wow, we ain't in Kansas anymore, are we? And jumped up, ran to the back door, and Barbara's coming and carrying her dog with 2 holes in her arm. And I about died. The dog scratched her. Has nothing to do with beer, but I got
it's a hell of a story.
Premises. And that was an interesting experience. It really was. They were trying to take on San Miguel, and over there, Itoang, people would order beer, okay? And they'd be given a San Miguel. And Asia Brewery, you know, beer house, and we do blind tests, and statistically the beers would be identical to the sales staff. And we show them that, and they said, yes, but you must make it taste like San Miguel already. You know, it just couldn't do it. So after I left, you know, San Miguel had a beautiful ceramic label on a bottle over there, nice shaped bottle. Yeah. And again, they own the Philippines, so they had hired a marketing guy away from San Miguel, and the guy had to be brilliant. Because what he did is he copied that bottle as close as he could shape-wise and not be infringing on their patent for the bottle, made a ceramic label that looked as close as it could without getting busted. And since when you went to the Philippines and you just say beer and they bring a San Miguel, what did they name the beer? Beer.
Beer.
And it worked. Interesting story. I got to tell you something, okay? Everyone talks about the art and science of brewing. Yeah, that's fine. You know where the true art is going out and selling. I tell every guy who I've worked with or friends who are getting a brewing, I said, here's what you got to do. You have to go out and sell. Because you learn humility, you learn what it's like to get your ass handed to you, and you learn no doesn't mean no next week, no next month, or no next year. You've got to be persistent. And it really, I can't tell you how many times I've been bloodied. It was interesting, though. I first heard about microbreweries when I was in the Philippines reading Brewer's Digest. And some brewery in Michigan had started, and I was just astounded by the idea of this little brewery. I loved it. These guys were getting bottles back, and they'd wash them all. They were using returnable bottles that they'd wash by hand.
Yep.
They didn't stay in business too long. But I love the idea. I'm from Wisconsin originally, Racine, and my parents, my dad was an educator, and he went to work for the state, had moved to Middleton. And I was thinking over in the Philippines, you know, I love Madison, Wisconsin. Got to be a cool place to start a brewery. And within 2 days of being home, my dad goes, hey, look at this. There's an article in the Capital Times about a guy named Ed Janis wanting to start a brewery. And I'm going, cool. So I found his name in the phone book, and I got his answering machine, and I left it.
Explain to some of these people what a phone book was.
And I left, and I left a quick resume plus some magic words that guaranteed a callback. I'll invest. And so I got a call from Ed, and damned if I didn't convince him to hire me. And I took a job out of the industry, and I lived in Kankakee, Illinois. I had a place that made chocolate powders, waiting for this brewery to happen. And I literally came back here in February of '86, and we went to Stroh's at one time. Randy was talking about Stroh's Fire Brewed a while ago. We went to the old Stroh breweries, and at that time, driving down at 6 in the morning at Gratiot Avenue, I mean, Detroit was pretty rough back then. That place looked like it had been in a war.
Yeah.
Man. And this poor brewery, you could see where all the kettles were because they pulled them out, but they had brick that these kettles rested in because of all the fire.
Yep.
And all the bricks have been knocked in. Quite frankly, folks, personally, I'm not a beer geek. I'm a brewery geek. I love the industry. I love breweries and all that. And to see that, it just depressed the hell out of me. A grand old brewery and it's gone.
Yeah.
So Capital was interesting because, we weren't going to import the beer. I thought it was a brilliant idea. We're going to import the brewmaster, who was Fred Shear. And away we went, and we first mashed in on April 17th, 1986 at 6:30 p.m. And I want to tell you the truth, the beer, quite frankly, it was not good. The first Gartenbrau special just didn't quite make it. And, but we persevered and worked at it over time. But what was interesting, talking about sales, I go into bars on State Street, because I'm going to go down and sell our beer. I'm going to kill it. And I'd walk into a place, say, hi, my name's Kirby Nelson. I'm assistant brewer at Capital Brewery. Huh? Yeah, we're making our own beer. Would you buy it and put it on tap? And they would look at me and basically, are you out of your mind? Yeah, but you want to buy it? And it was different. The first the first bar I saw in this town that was starting to take advantage of the up-and-coming craft industry was Paul's Club on State Street. It had burned, and when they rebuilt, the bar manager, and he was brilliant, convinced the owner this is going to be a coming thing. And he convinced the guy to put in 10 tap lines, all craft except one, which is Miller Lite. And it was for us such a novelty to walk in there and see all these different American craft beers. And I'm going to be honest with you, the quality was iffy back in those days. Because for me personally, look at how I started. I started out in a big brewery, learning quality, assurance, learning how to run an operation, and blah, blah, blah. And we started Capital. I did not know a Weizen from a Märzen. Sometimes I still think that's the case. But I knew what it took to produce standard and a solid beer, okay? And a lot of folks who came from homebrewing, I'm not dismissing homebrewers at all, did not have that experience. And it was one thing to make something at home. It was another thing to come up commercially when not very good equipment was available back then. And back then, you could find a lot of great equipment available for very, very pennies on $1 million cheap if you wanted to build a brewery the size of the state capitol. It was all large brewery stuff. So finding things was difficult. The only official brewing equipment we had in that brewery was our brew house. And here's a story how Capital got that beautiful copper brew house, okay? Here's a guy who was ahead of his time, living in Naples, Florida, and he loved English cask conditioned ale. He'd traveled over to England a lot, apparently. So he decided, and this had to be in the late 70s, early 80s, he was going to build a brewery and make traditional cask conditioned British ales. So he convinced a bunch of people to invest in his company, started working on his brewery in Naples, and big surprise, he ran out of money. So he went back to his investors, and they said, whoa, time out. We don't want to throw good money after bad. What are you making? So the guy, at great expense to himself, flew over a couple, 3 casks of traditional English, from the motherland of those beers, so to speak, English cask conditioned ale, set it up in a suite of a Holiday Inn, invited his investors, a local media net. Everyone hated the beer. Boom, he's done. So this brew house went to a place. Did you ever deal with Bernie Greenberg out of Brewers and Bottlers?
No, I know his name though.
God, yeah. He's a classy guy. Anyways, I should say a sharp businessman, all right?
There you go.
Anyways, this brew house sat in there for years, and Ed Janis somehow found it. And we got that brew house back then. In fact, Ed is friends with a guy named Nicky Pritzker, and you've heard of Pritzkers, like Governor Pritzker of Illinois. Nicky's family was Hyatt Hotels, and he loaned Ed the money to buy that brew house, and I think it was only $25,000 then. And I've got a picture of that brew house coming across the Highway 12 belt line when it was still 2 lanes, all loaded on a truck that I got on the wall of my house somewhere. So that brew house got to us via a failed Florida venture, which I always thought was a pretty fun story, and it's a beautiful brew house. It really is. But I did learn, if you ever go and see those copper kettle, if you go up about halfway, you see there's a ring around the stack. That's for you to hold on to for dear life while you're trying to shine the kettle. That's its purpose. So,
Okay. No, my first craft beers were from Fritz Maytag's
Yes.
place. Yep, Anchor. Anchor Steam was okay, but I liked their Liberty Ale and their Porter.
yeah, Liberty Ale is kind of a classic. It was probably one of the absolute first commercially available big hoppy beers.
Yep, and it's like, man, this is the kind of beer I like. And then the next really was the stuff Kirby was making in the mid '80s there, and it's like, yeah, this is cool that brewers are out there doing this, and there was no way we were going to do it at the size we were. 500 barrel brews. What weren't going to work at that point. And then we went bigger we built a new brew house in
1,000 barrel.
1,100 barrel brews, high gravity, and we made most of the time 15 a day. Most of those would be old style back in the day. We had the largest lauter tons in the world for a couple of decades, I think, or over a decade.
You guys, you look into these things, it's almost intimidating. They are massive.
They're 40 feet in diameter. There's two of them. Why buy one when you can get two? So the old brew house, we had the strain master, and we had a 20-foot lauter ton there. And of course, it was all manual and and dangerous. And the thing about the decline of the Heileman brewery group was that it gave us excess volume to fill up with contract production. And as the craft beer market grew, and so many of them they'd get one or two beers that would outgrow their facility, and they rather than invest in a bigger brewery, they would farm it out to us. And so it was interesting, and you got everybody out there that ever brewed in a coffee can to come in because they had this great idea for a beer, and sometimes they had a full recipe and procedures and all that. Other times they had a
wing and a prayer.
Basically a basic thought for a beer and a great name for it. It's like,
I'm going to own the world with this.
and then they'd be brewing what 5 gallons at home, and we'd bring them in and show them the 40-foot lauter tons, and after we revived them and told them that the minimum brew size we could make was 500 barrels, most of them went away and stayed away. But with the craft beer industry coming on so strong, and then the competition, some of those had extra capacity too, and so they were like a stepping stone up to be able to brew 100, 200 barrels at a time rather than 1,000 or more, and was good for City Brewery because it gave them these other, potential beer icons in their mind anyway. A middle step, take a step up, and if you get bigger than that, then come back and we'll talk. And we ended up doing beer for a lot of big companies out there. We did lots of beer for Boston Beer Company, Sam Adams.
This is after Heileman City, right?
This is City Brewery, sorry, yes. Yeah, Heileman, pretty much, they did a little bit of,
Well, we've got to actually Cleary kind of saw this coming. And about the time, a couple years after we started Capital, they built Blatt's Milwaukee Brewery, which was beautiful Briggs 85-barrel brew house. George built that thing.
yep.
And anyways, nothing in unit tanks, and they hired Hans Kessler, who had left Monroe, and he was brewing out in Hawaii, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. And anyways, so they had a cereal cooker. They weren't what you call hardcore, wild-eyed craft breweries, but they had a lot more personality. And they were great. In fact, Hans had done a phenomenal Weizen beer there. And he did a double bock called Ultra, which was over the top. He was actually a very good brewer.
Yes.
And I remember sitting in this room that was pretty sterile, but had a beautiful 100-year-old back bar. And waiting on George, I'd sit there and pound Weizen watching traffic jams on I-43, or I-40, whatever it was. And the beers were something, but again, it was draft only, and they were way ahead of the time and went nowhere.
Yeah.
So how are we going to justify this brewery? And I can't remember the name of the distributor there, but they started making brewing Blatts there and quarter barrels.
Yeah.
And so they were using this beautiful brewery to make a popular price beer. They also did try to do some contract brewing for Widmer. If you remember many years ago,
Widmer.
in the late 80s, possibly early 90s, Widmer had what they call a Hefeweizen, it was an American wheat ale, that literally, they were the first super hazy. It looked like pea soup. And they started making it at Blatt's Milwaukee, and I remember they were with Wow Distributing, and basically told them out of groundhouse that, okay, we're doing this beer here, and you will be selling 2 truckloads a month of kegs. And they, said, no way.
Yeah.
This is in the Northwest, you might sell a couple pallets a month. And the distributor was right. Widmer didn't last there. They basically went back to the Northwest saying Midwesterners didn't understand good beer.
It was a beautiful brewery.
It was beautiful.
They were ahead of the curve on that, but they were a little too far ahead. And the biggest thing about it was all they had was a keg line.
Right.
They had no packaging line.
Were you at the grand opening?
No, I wasn't.
Barbara and I got to go to that, and I've got a picture of us. The keg company, I can't remember the name of the keg company, was figuring that these guys were going to get into Sankey kegs with all that.
Yeah.
So the beer we were drinking out of was in gold-plated kegs, not painted. Gold-plated. I got a picture of it somewhere.
I do too, and I was going to bring it, and I forgot it. Yeah, the story was there was an ounce of gold on each. There were like 2 kegs. There were more than 1 keg anyway. There was an ounce of gold plated on these barrels, on each of these barrels. Yeah.
And of course, it didn't work when Heileman's was filling these quarter barrels. And again, you got this beautiful little specialty brewery, and all of a sudden you're trying to help justify its existence by making, supermarket price quarter barrels, so to speak. And so eventually they sold it to Liney's, but it was so cool, they'd put in a Neubecker keg washer, and the only single-headed Neubecker we were doing Hoff Stevens kegs, you remember those delights, and had a nice filler, and they only put 1,000 kegs or something through it and shut it down. And so George said, you want to buy this? And I did, and we got it for a very good price.
Yeah.
And we used it at Capital until we got our Sankey keg machine. I'm looking over there, I still get a kick out of Bob bringing all these beers in. And I just saw a tumble of fire, and I got to tell you the story of how this beer came into being, okay? A number of years ago, Mark Licheron used to write for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and this would have been in the mid-'90s. And one year he did an article on Oktoberfest beers in general and ours in specific. And included was a color picture of yours truly standing by one of the kettles, my usual dirtbag, self-ripped-up T-shirt, hat on backwards, holding up a glass, and the sun had been coming in through the windows, and it was a color picture. And the captain said, Kirby Nelson admires the glow of autumnal fire. And I read the article, cool article, and a couple of my coworkers are hanging out having beers, and I walk in, hey, look at me, boys, got my picture in the paper, and I flip it down, and one of my coworkers, John Abernathy, looked at it and looked up at me and said, you think you're so cool, Mr. Autumnal Fire. And as soon as he said it that way, I'm going, start dancing around, wow, what a name for a beer. We registered the name, what the hell are we going to make? our Oktoberfest was quite popular, and Blonde Doppelbock was gaining great notoriety. So basically, I made a version of an Oktoberfest beer and jacked it to Doppelbock strength. And the first trial we did was at the Great Dane. And they might still have it on tap under Oktoberbock sometimes. But what I did there as a trial is what we stayed with. And so at that time, a gentleman named Tom Fuchs was president. And we decided we're going to start bottling this stuff. And so we send in, back then, if you sell beer out of state, you have to get national label approval. And we sent in a label for approval. Now, this was during a time when the big evil breweries were making beers like Power Master and bottles of malt liquor that looked like whiskey bottles. And the Inner City Baptist Church, because it was being sold, as cheap beer being predatory to a certain extent, you know what I mean? And so the government was ATF was very sensitive to names right there. We sent this name in for approval, and I got back a handwritten letter that says, can't use because the name indicates strength. STRNGHT, strength. What the hell is this? Back then a beer label couldn't imply anything obscene, anything sexual, or strength of the beer. Up until really in the 90s, it was illegal to put the ABV on beer labels because the government in their wisdom thought that breweries would compete and people would buy just based on the strength of the beer. So anyways, we had to fight this. We had to say, it has nothing to do with the strength. That's a strong beer. But, it's the fall time, the colors, and blah, blah, blah. And it cost us many thousands, but we did get the name approved. And Autumnal Fire became one of the beers that Capital was known for at one time. And I've always really liked it. I was very proud of that one.
Very good beer.
In an Ice Fire, what Bob has there, we started, again, making Doppelbocks or Eisbocks is technically illegal because it's technically distilling.
Yep.
You're concentrating alcohol.
Yes.
Instead of heat, you're freezing. Well, so what? And we did Ice Fire. And what I did was I changed the formula because I knew a lot of richness or more intensity would come off with certain things, so I did some modifications. And that really, it's a shadow of what it was in the 15-year-old bottle there. That was a pretty nice beer. These big, heavy Märzen-type beers in the Doppelbock and Ice Fire, I always thought worked very well. They're very nice beers. I wish I still had that one, as a matter of fact. Now, the Blonde Doppelbock, how that came into being, I was into Germany once for 1 week, drank 107 beers, and took notes on all of them. It's pretty smeared. And I got to write the trip off because I was there studying beer. And but I tasted my first Blonde Doppelbock there, and I loved it. I loved the malt character over there, and everyone decocts the brewing procedure where you do temperature raises by boiling the mash. You're supposed to create Maillard reactions, melanoidins, richer malt flavor, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I said, okay, boys, we're going to make this Blonde Doppelbock. And I had a vessel, a small vessel that we use for making wild rice as a cereal cooker. And I said, we're going to decoct part of this and add it, and it's going to taste just like in Bavaria. The beer, and I'm using American barley, was a complete flop in terms of tasting like it was a German beer and having that malt character. And I found out after I did it that it's easy to get malt character, German malt character in a beer. You just have to buy German malt. But anyways, we decocted, the brewery smells wonderful. So even though the beer was, on the one hand, kind of a failure, on the other hand, man, this is really good. And per Bob saying, he claimed I said Maibach 4 years. I must have been having a few that night. I did realize that something like Blonde Doppelbock, I used to say that, man, if I was anywhere near as hip as cool as I thought I'd be, I would let this stuff sit 3-4 months in the warehouse because, I'd buy a bunch to keep home, and it really did improve over time. And actually, Dan Carey put a stamp on that because when he does Gyrator now, whatever it's called, it is bottled and let this sit for a few months before he releases it. Something about these big malt beers sitting like that really does wonders to them. And I can't remember the exact reason. I always knew when I poured Blonde Doppelbock, I was disappointed in the foam. As I did some research on it, apparently some of these big malt beers, ironically, aren't real good at holding foam. And so that was the reasoning behind that. And again, this is, I haven't messed with that beer for a long time, but yeah, the double box, were a lot of fun.
It's good beer. And the Bachfest was,
Oh, Bachfest, yeah.
yeah. Of course, it was in February.
You've been 30 feet in the air throwing fish at people, believe me. I have to tell you this story, and we would let distributors come down, okay? And it's not I promote heavy drinking, but we let them, they'd come down, and the cellar was there, and they could wander the brewery and go outside and come in and drink beer out of the tanks. And we had a tank of blonde out, we usually have a tank of blonde for them, waiting for the second packaging. One time, we had an old kitchen in there, and I walk in at the end of Bachfest, and we had Quaker Steak bringing chicken wings, and they had their little wet naps in tubes. They'd rip open and roll them. Here's a guy from one of our distributorships sitting there, peeling these wet naps open and eating them. Dude, what are you doing? I'm eating string cheese.
That open. Don't take a shot.
That is a true story. I didn't want to break his heart. So we kind of eased off on how much those guys could drink when they visited us after that. Some of the things you see, huh?
Well, one of the coolest things, and I wish I'd appreciated it more when I was
bourbon?
What?
What do you got in there, bourbon?
I don't know, but it's damn good.
What is it?
It's dry Irish stout.
I'm sorry.
Dry Irish stout.
Oh, okay. I'll look forward to trying it.
Nice, yeah. I wish I'd paid a little more attention when I started there. I was 21, I guess, out of college. And I didn't realize until later that a lot of the guys I worked with, the older guys, started there just post-Prohibition. We worked with guys that had started at the Heileman Brewery in 1935, 36, and the stories they could have told, and I would have taken them to a tavern, bought them as much beer and food as they wanted, and just recorded their stories, because they had the greatest stories from down through the years. And I got a lot of them, but boy, I really kicked myself for not doing that.
Because I always, when all these old guys would come into Auburndale, I love listening to them talk.
Oh, man.
The brewmaster was Al Britsky, I believe, when I started there.
Yeah, yep. Al was from
Winona. He was working at a brewery in Winona before.
Oh, he's up at Boobs.
Boobs it was called? Okay.
Spelled Bubs,
Yeah.
but it's pronounced Boobs. Anyway, yeah, Al.
You think that would fly today?
What's that?
You think that would fly today?
Yeah, you might have trouble with that one. But yeah, the knowledge there that those guys had and the things they'd seen, especially in the brewing industry over those decades, had to be just phenomenal. And God, their stories were just great. And as I said, Heileman, nationally wasn't that big, until really the late 60s, and it's pretty much when Russ Cleary took the helm and started promoting the La Crosse Brewery and buying up these struggling regional brewers and building this beast of a corporation that was existing breweries, basically, and kept them. And what was nice about it, I spent my whole career there, but under Heileman we had brewmaster conclaves, and we moved around to all the breweries and spent significant time in there with the workers and the brewers, the brewmaster, and so I'm from one brewery, technically, but I've been through, I don't even know how many, dozens in the United States, and spent significant time, and it's great to get together with other brewers. And in the old days, if a brewer was having a problem, they would talk to the other brewer in town and say, hey, I got this going on. What have you had it, and what did you do? And they'd share information. You don't have that much anymore, but
You know what?
maybe you
Not
do.
in the large breweries, but in the smaller situations, I can't tell you how much symbiosis we have going on.
It's good.
It's
good.
We help each other with materials, with carbon-4 a lot. Clint Lohman, if you haven't been to Working Draft, I got to tell you something. Clint Lohman is an incredibly talented brewer. I had the pleasure of, he worked at our brewery for a while, and he was great then. And I remember when he left, I was so disappointed, but I would have had to fire him for being stupid if he wouldn't have taken this opportunity. You know what I mean? And when I go there, the things he is doing with lagers, and he tries to be traditional. You might taste some diacetyl in his Czech lagers. He's trying to emulate what it was like, from Czechoslovakia. And put it this way, you guys, to try to get to control a small amount of a flavor that you might not necessarily want there, that takes skill.
Yeah.
And it really does. And Clint, I didn't have to teach Clint a thing. He just had to work in a brewery and get a feel for a larger operation and how things were done, et cetera, and he just took it and ran with it. And I can't speak highly enough of it. I have, again, the state went from 7 breweries when Randy and I started out at Heileman to, there's 200-300 now. I don't know most of them.
I have no idea.
And, the country has gone to 9,000 to 10,000 breweries. The majority of them are small. And you see it exploded so quickly. And I think a lot of people got into this on 2 occasions. In the early 90s, it really started growing. In fact, when Red Hook was bought by Bud and went public, it sold for $34 a share for about 5 minutes and then plummeted and never came back. And a lot of people lost serious amounts of money. But anyways, in fact, I got a call once during that time from a guy starting in Wisconsin. He goes, yeah, you make beer, right? And I, yes, sir. I'm raising ostriches, but I ain't making any money. You think I should start a brewery? Click. But that was the mentality, and I saw it happen. About 15 minutes after we opened Wisconsin, the model changed quickly. It became very small. The breweries exploded, but very small and very local. And which is, I really love the fact that breweries are hyper local. In fact, I will argue to anyone that the most successful craft brewery in this country, second to none, is New Glarus. And the reason is because they have become very large, 250,000 barrels, mainly based on Spotted Cow, which is an incredibly well-made mild beer, but they make a whole spectrum of very interesting, very great beers that are outstanding, and they did it all by staying in Wisconsin. That, to me, is how this industry should have been, because a lot of breweries like Tallgrass, Green Flash had their strategy based on multi-state sales. When things contracted in the 2013 to 16 range, they're gone. Their model disappeared. And right now, there's so much out there. Too much. And right now, you guys, I hate to tell you, but you can buy used equipment so cheap it's disgusting. You know what I mean?
There's for every brewery coming online, there's probably 2 or 3,
Yeah, and it's very
pulling up
sad
stakes.
to see. But it's just the nature of the market. And I've got to tell you something, and I think really had a big difference in terms of what technology did to really aid small breweries, very small breweries, in terms of being successful. Look, if you used to want a canned product, you'd have to order many truckloads of pre-printed cans.
Yep.
That cost you had to pay for up front, had to pay storage fees on it, and you're talking about tens of thousands of cases of beer, okay?
Yep.
Within the last 10
like
years,
this.
the advent of
bring
mobile
beer to me.
canning technology came on, where you have fillers. We used to use a wild goose filler when we were doing war pigs. And that's the reason we didn't do them anymore, because we didn't have a can line that we could make money off of, neither could they. But it put out very low DO, very nice product. We use Woolcraft can now sometimes that Clint uses. They have counter pressure fillers. You're looking at very, very low dissolved oxygens. But besides the fact that, this filling technology on a very small basis there was also the advent of can labels and can sleeves. So now instead of having to buy truckloads and truckloads of cans, You could buy a pallet of bullets and get someone to sleeve them for you, or buy labels for it, which aren't as nice. And now you've got digital printing that makes cans that are just gorgeous. And you can buy small amounts. So you've got this technology of, again, being able to have someone come in and can your beer for you and put it in a beautiful package, and now you can compete on the street.
Some of us from the club went out to Potosi to do our mostly annual collaboration beer, and while we were there, I noticed there were cans that were labeled, and they were coming around and putting sleeves on them because one of the contract brewers, they had this brand that's like, it is no more, but they still owned
The cans, yeah.
these cans who was printed. So they're just, putting the sleeve over the.
Yep.
We have real
Yep.
symbiosis with Potosi. If you guys haven't been there, the guy's name is Dave Fritz. And he has done very well, and he's very much into the community there, and he didn't want that brewery to go away. He bought a lot of the ale asylum equipment, for example, and they've got a very nice brewery operation, but they're doing what we've had to do to survive. I've got to tell you, at Wisconsin right now, / Lake Louie, beer is maybe 15% of our business. When we put in this can line, as we were putting in for beer, we realized that there's also this huge potential. There's been explosions of beverages on the market, okay? Anything from energy drinks to seltzers to ready-to-drink cocktails to beers with, it has this in it, you'll drink this and you'll feel the float. And now THC is becoming huge. And look, here we've got a tank that holds 240 barrels of fermenting product, okay? And that's going to take anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 weeks generally, all right, for a beer. You can now blend and turn these things over in 24 hours. And so with a small number of tanks, we can crank out a lot in our can line, which is making us, it's going to make us strong and profitable as a company, and it still allows us to make beer. If you really want to piss off brewers, tell them, well, yeah, we make a beer, and now we got to do this. So now instead of making beer, you're going to weigh this and measure that and dump that and blend it and go. You know what I mean? And when you love making beer, that is kind of, it's almost insulting. But it's important for us as a business. And a lot of breweries have done it. City has done it. Potosi is doing it. Carbon 4 is doing it. You know what I mean? It's just been a way where as the brewing market is, as the beer market is contracted, that you can still take advantage of all this expensive equipment and work very hard at getting customers, because once you get into co-man or co-packing, you may have, right now we're full, but you have to constantly be hustling, because a good customer will call you tomorrow and say, we're done. We found a place that'll do it cheaper and it's bigger. So it's a constant hustle, but yet still we are at heart brewers, and will be. Besides Verona, if you don't know, we have a little 5-barrel system at a brewery in Oconomowoc, at a ballpark. And I love it. It's 1,000 square foot of sanctuary, and it's really a nice system. And so we're still really serious about making beer, but we've had to adapt to the realities of the market. And so beer right now is in a tough spot, and you've seen some really strange things happen using Anheuser-Busch, Bud Light. You know, that company, since that fiasco about what guys like Kid Rock considered an abomination of a character, whoever they put in that label that represented the woke community, I guess.
He should know.
That company has lost $15 billion of value. And talking to the Bud House in town the other day, a friend of mine who's a beer manager, I said, is Bud Light come back at all? He goes, no, and it's never gonna. And so, now you have Modelo as the largest selling beer in this country. So it's a very volatile market. A lot of things can change, but beer is always going to be there. And I think the craft has been, craft beer has been a very, very good for this country, because it's basically opened people's eyes to potential in a variety of beer, and made for a lot of local personality, and a lot of things that are unique, and are from entrepreneurs instead of some big corporation that, after being a proud American company for decades, sells to the Brazilians or the Belgians, whatever it was, for Anheuser-Busch, for example. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just that I hated seeing it from American brewery standpoint. I don't know about Randy, but I can drone on for months, and I don't want to bore you guys too much. If you have any questions at any point, by the way, interrupt.
Yeah, I have
Oh, I'm sorry, I got her first. We'll get to you.
I think in the very beginning, you just mentioned a side thing about branding, using some technology that they use now for like NA beers and different things. I just wasn't sure what you meant by that.
I'm sorry, what beers?
Like non-alcoholic.
Oh,
Oh, biggest, hottest category in the beer market that I never thought was going to come.
NA sales are up 22% this year.
Yep. Yeah. And well, you've got you know, the millennials, the younger people, kind of kicked it off, this surge, and but it's gaining popularity. And actually, Heileman and probably La Crosse, we had a, it's basically a small still. We brewed a regular good beer all the way to completion, and then took it and ran it through the de-alcoholizer, basically a very small
Vacuum distillation.
vacuum powered still. And we were making, I think, the most NA in this country, in Kingsbury NA and a few others, before Miller Sharps came out. Ours was better because you started with a full fermented, full finished regular beer, and then took the alcohol out. Sharps, Miller Sharps, if anybody remembers that, gave you cold carbonated wort, basically. But I can see how it's coming back because of the, you know, the drinking and driving laws, and you know, people just don't want to get that blotto. And with the craft brewers out there, they've expanded the flavor profile of all American beers. So you can go and go have a Sierra Nevada, I don't even know what they call it, but it's an IPA, it's a non-alcoholic IPA, and honestly, you really can't miss the alcohol in it.
So that vacuum distillation doesn't pull out all those volatiles?
Well, it's got what they call a recombiner that does put some of that back into the product. And it was a reasonable facsimile.
Kingsbury, those weren't bad beers. I used to taste them when I worked in La Crosse.
What's that?
I thought those NAs weren't bad. This was, you know,
No, they weren't bad.
again, 40 years ago.
Well, and we sold a lot of it, lots of it. And we're back doing NAs again, different process, but for different people, and it's hot. But when you can go out and have a Guinness Zero, and compared to their regular Guinness, which is very thin anyway, you really don't miss the alcohol because you got the other flavors. You got the other flavors in there to carry the product. So, you know, unlike the old NAs, which were non-alcoholic standard American lagers, you didn't have anything to hide behind once you took that alcohol out. So the flavor impact was much greater than what you're seeing now. And Athletic
they're killing it.
Brewing, are they public? I don't think so, but.
I don't know, they've really done it. And you know, and when you were asking how we do that, at our brewery, there's two types of NAs we've done. And the first one I absolutely can't stand. It's called arrested fermentation. So you're brewing a beer that's at 4 Plato, okay? And we usually add dried yeast to it, and you don't aerate it much, and you start watching it. Because what you have to do is allow the fermentation to begin, but then you have to rest it by hitting the cooling. And time it just right, so you end up with a beer that has less than 0.5 ABV. That's a bitch.
That is a bitch.
And because if you do it wrong, all of a sudden, wow, we're at 0.6. Doesn't sound like much difference, but you have to dilute it so much to get it back at that volume of liquid, at that low ABV, to get it where you want it to be. It just doesn't taste that. And after all that pain in the ass of making it, it's a terrible product. It tastes very warty, very seriously. It's not pleasant.
Well, the other thing is you have to work very quickly, very fast with that product because it doesn't go through fermentation, so you don't really until you don't have much alcohol in there. So it's very susceptible to micros, and when we make them now, from the brew house to the package is 48 to 72 hours, tops.
It also is you have to use ALDC. Up the button is arrested fermentations. You get fermentation going enough for the yeast to throw diacetyl, and then you stop it. The way to do it this day and age is RO. You know, RO technology's come such a long way, and we do RO at our place. And the head brewer and the guy who's really running the operation right now at Wisconsin is a kid. Well, he's 40, but he's brilliant, named Luke Foth, and he came from Octopi and he worked at a bunch of other breweries. Luke reminds me of a lot of Clint. Very, very talented brewer, very good with equipment, you know, a lot of good stuff. And he at Octopi, he had done a lot of the work for their NAs, and he gets it. And we basically are, you know, we're making one in partnership with Harley Davidson, which is kind of cool. A label, being part of seeing how they developed the label was amazing. And anyways,
Keep
basically with
them coming.
RO, you know, you're running through the filters and you're concentrating the liquid and getting rid of the alcohol, so to speak, and then you make it up, even though the final permeate, whatever it's called, still has a decent amount of alcohol in it. But you're adding water to bring it back to the original volume. You have to add maybe some back sweetener to give it still some body and help with the flavor, and a little bit of hop character back. You know, so it is really, it takes an understanding of what's going on to make it. And we've done a very good job. In fact, the Weizen we did once, we did a Hefeweizen that way once, and Luke bought it and he goes, "What do you think of this?" And I took a sip and I slammed it on the glass, just yelled, "Luke," because he had nailed it. It tasted exactly like a Hefeweizen. I don't know if we're gonna, and ironically, a guy in charge of our brewery one time, he didn't like wheat beers, so he goes, "This isn't any good." And we both look at him going, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, I don't like wheat beers, and I like this one." All I can say was shit, I reckon. So we're trying, you know, we're getting a lot of call for NA business, but it really is time consuming. You need a couple of tanks, and you're gonna have to get water that you make sure it's low aeration to dilute it with. So it is a process. And our O machines right now, I don't think are sized for the demand we're starting to get on the product. So problem is, if you get a nice, really high-class, quick-moving alkalizer, it's a very, very expensive piece of equipment. You know, so right now we're going to work with what we've got, and it's working. But it is a growing category, and we'll just have to see what happens. Someone over there? Yo.
Before we go to more questions, I think Bob wants to thank you.
I think we'll do a couple more Q&A.
You throwing us out?
No.
We can do it again sometime.
Didn't we have some gifts from him too? I could have been. Oh, right.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I do appreciate them.
Yes, absolutely.
Also, before we go to the questions, because people are starting to trickle out.
Oh, I get it.
Let's give a round of applause too.
No. Danke.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so talk about looking forward, some of the changing NA beers, shrinking beer industry. We talked about looking back, knowledge, what you've seen. Are you seeing a shift in the industry where some things that we've enjoyed from the craft beer boom are going to go away? And I like from a homebrew scale, I've seen like White Labs Ultra Firm came onto the market for brew beers and disappeared. Omega, the Thai Yeast, came onto the market for homebrewers. They are now shutting that down for homebrewers at least. Are some of those things going to disappear? Maybe I'm talking to the wrong blogger guys, traditional blogger guys, but are some of those new style beer, you know, yeast strains, hop strains, strains that we're seeing, is that going to slow down and shrink and disappear?
Well, hope springs eternal. No, your point is very well taken. Basically he's asking, like, there's been such an explosion of different weird and sometimes what in the hell are you thinking beer styles, but people have been quite frankly craving that. We have created as brewers an audience whose attention span is limited at best. And so you see things like Untapped. There's an audience on Untapped who will drink 2 ounces of a beer, score it, and never touch it again. Those aren't beer drinkers, those are people who need a life. You know what I'm saying? But in terms of the flagship, which used to be how breweries kept going, you got all your money invested in it and that, and you can count on that to basically, is your bread and butter, has become a big challenge. It's expensive to package a beer and put it on the shelf. And like I tell many times, I've been part of it. You start a new brewery, and you're hotter than a $7 pistol in the greatest things in sliced bread for a couple months, and then the next one comes along.
Yeah.
And your stuff languages. I can't tell you how many times I've heard of beers that have big names, big reputation, go to a market like Chicago, and in the first month sell twice as much beer in 1 month than they do in the next 11. So a lot of it is market driven. One of the things that has surprised me most is, quite frankly, the demise of the appreciation of Belgian-style ales in this country. Almagan was a great ale producer, okay? The brewmaster there actually now is brewer for 8 Elite, Troy Aikman's light beer. And we were doing that for quite a while. And Phil's a great guy and knows his stuff. But all these Belgian ales that were very highly regarded out of that place, and rightfully so, people stopped drinking them. What could be more of a perfect beer for a hardcore beer audience than the variety of Belgian ales, you know what I mean? But when he left, their largest selling beer was an IPA, a hazy IPA. So, I don't know. You know what I mean? We're always looking constantly, well, IPAs are 6% of the craft market. Okay, well, there's 10 to the 8th of them out there. And what we've seen is a IPA audience likes to hop around a lot, no pun intended, you know what I mean? Trying different beers. And IPAs are not the greatest shelf life products in the world, you know what I mean?
Oh, no.
So there's a constant balance of what's the minimum we can make to justify this so it turns over well in the street. I love lagers. I think for the last 15 years in reading craft publications, this is going to be the lager. Yeah, right. It hasn't happened. But that's not, but it could change. Again, using working drafts as an example, you go there, they have what? Anywhere from 5 to 8 different lagers on it at a given time. So
I would say the sheen is definitely going to come off a lot of them, whether they actually go away. And this goes, in my mind, more to the sours and the fruity stuff and things like that. And yes, the fickleness or whatever however you want to call it is a little frustrating for brewers, because we brewed for our generation, our fathers, our grandfathers, and boy, if they drank old style, that's all they drank until they stepped into the coffin. And very brand loyal. Now we work hard, like we work a year on getting a beer where we want it, and they take a sip and they say, that's great. What do you have next? It's like, well,
one of these days someone's
stick
going to
with
ask
this
me,
a while.
Someone's going to ask me one day, what do you have that's new? And I'm going to kill them.
I'll visit you wherever you are.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's frustrating. But as a general statement, beer drinkers are much more highly educated now than they ever were, because they try
perhaps
different.
they're much more adventurous.
Yes,
But that doesn't necessarily equate to a good business model.
that's true.
I remember Kyle, great guy, the brewer for come on, they got the palm trees. Yes. We pasteurized some stuff at our brewery for them about 1.5 years ago. And he goes to me, in our first year of business, I made 177 different beers. The vast majority, which have been very popular for them, are a sour base with assorted fruits and this and that, and a lot of nifty names. And it just kind of, I really had to step back and say, man, how can that continue? You know what I mean? It's very, very challenging once you get above a certain point to keep up with that.
The best trend that I've seen fairly recently, and it took a while to get here because we're the lager guys, and brewers our age are, we like malt and we like hops, but we like some balance in it too, and a lot of small brewers really didn't do much lager brewing for the first maybe even years of their existence, because honestly, they really weren't good enough or weren't consistent enough to put out a good lager beer. A lot of them are coming on board now because they've brewed long enough and they've figured out how to do it to make some decent, decent to very good lager beers. And I tell them all the time, I say, hey, you make all these beers, and yes, they all appeal to this niche, this niche, this niche. And you'll have 6-8 customers come in, and 2/3 of them will be hop heads, and then you got some who want something more approachable, and they'll cool their jets for a beer or two, and then it's like, okay, let's go somewhere where I can get a beer. But they figured out that if they produce something for the other people, and you get the entire group to hang around for another pint or two, you're going to make a lot more money. And so I'm really happy to see small brewers getting heavier, not heavy, but heavier into lagers, and that's a good sign.
Well, it's like Kirby was talking about Working Draft. When Working Draft opened, they had all these stupid hazy IPAs and whatever. It's like, fuck that. You got the Munich Dunk on tap. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah, I'll quote and say the Hayes Bros would come in and complain if they could see through the glass.
Yeah,
I just, by the way, here's another story I got to tell, because it's so cool, because it has to do with lager beers, and it has to do with the UW, Wisconsin. Forever when I would kind of do a little bit of research, I'm giving a talk on beers and lagers overall. Where did lagers come from? Okay? And it was always kind of obscure. Well, in the 1830s, all of a sudden they found this new yeast, they're going to make lager beers, but there never was a real definitive explanation about how it happened, all right? But then along came a gentleman named Dr. Chris Hittinger. He's a yeast genius, and he's a researcher at the UW-Madison. Great guy, brilliant guy. And then a bunch of his fellow yeast nerds were down in Patagonia in a beech forest. And there's something called, excuse me, Randy, could you do the honors, please?
No, you've had enough.
It's called a gall.
Geez.
I've seen them on plants before. It's like a big wart on a plant that grows in a stem or something like that. It's due to some type of insect infestation. And I guess they're full of sugar. And Chris and his guys were down there, and they were finding some of these in Patagonia. They'd open up, and they were full of ethanol. Yeast. So they started doing research on this yeast, which they christened Saccharomyces eubanus. And as they studied it with other yeasts, they found a 99.99999 some percent of a match with today's lager yeast overall. What the hell happened? This was the first time they discovered eubanus. They have found out that it's relatively common in the southern hemisphere, but very rare in the northern hemisphere. The theory is that some guy was probably, as we started getting traveling, in the 1500s, guess what, the world ain't flat, right? Probably walked through a forest or something somewhere and got covered with this yeast. And somehow came back to Germany and went to visit a brewer friend. And somehow the yeast in his clothing, he rubbed against something or that, escaped, okay? Hold that thought for a moment, all right? In the 1400s, the mayor of Munich got all the brewers together and said, I'm tired of lousy beer. Sometimes your beer is good, sometimes it's bad, no more. Figure it out. And what they figured out was that in the warmer months, it was bad beer. In the colder months, it was better. Everything was spontaneously fermented, right? So it became illegal in Germany to brew from late April to late September. In the warm months, they have to rely on stocks of beer, okay? Anyways, this yeast somehow escaped into a German brew house. As I read, think about a German brew house in the 1800s, all right? Stone, wood, a lot of dust, a lot of malt dust hanging around, a lot of heat and moisture. Perfect environment for a microorganism. And somehow this yeast that was on this guy's clothes escaped and hybridized with the yeast that was present in the brewery that would initially fall into the wort via cool ship and ferment the beer, okay? So, they realized that we're still going to be drinking beer in the summer, all right? So what are we going to do? Since it was illegal to brew in the warm months, in March beer, they would brew a heavy-duty batch of beer, and a lot of it, and put it in wooden casks, and wheel it up into the Alps, and put it in the caves that were packed with ice to keep it cool, and the beer would slowly ferment. And during the summer, they'd be pulling these kegs out and drinking them. And as a side note, some of the guys who own these caves were very entrepreneurial-minded, planted chestnut trees around them, the entrances, and when the chestnut trees got large enough, they put tables and chairs under to serve the beer. That's the origin of the beer garden. Anyways, they realized as this beer sat, it was getting better. What the hell's going on here? It turns out this new hybridized yeast, ale yeast, as we all know, likes warmer temperatures. We ferment lagers colder. They're pushing this beer that's in the process of fermenting in these caves packed with ice. It's colder. This new hybrid yeast preferred colder temperatures. It outcompeted the ale yeast that was in there and made this beer, as it aged, got smoother and more pleasant. And what's this stuff on the bottom? Because ale, well, I don't know. They started using it, and that was lager yeast. And that's how it happened. That story is stranger than fiction, but it's absolutely true. And what's really cool is Chris and the gang, Wharf owns this yeast, the rights to this yeast, okay? The University Research Foundation, the economic arm of the UW. And Heineken bought the rights to it for 5 years, and they're putting out what they call wild lager. If you Google Heineken wild lager, the videos they're not doing anymore, but the video of their international brewmaster talking about it's on there, and it's very cool. And they found some of this yeast in a savanna, a tree area somewhere outside of Port Washington. And I got to brew with it. And it is so weird, it doesn't ferment trisaccharides. So you brew a beer with it, it's not going to ferment out as far, and it kind of tastes like a cross between pseudo lager and Belgian ale. And what I was so proud of, I got to talk and deal with these Heineken people, and they were very nice. And you look at this video, this guy's in cufflinks, nice jacket, buttoned up, and here I am in my ripped up t-shirt. And what felt so good, and I described him how it was going, how we fermented it, he said, you actually did very well with it. It's not what you call what we're used to as a commercial product. I would love to, I want to use it again. I've got it stored at Omega. Wharf let us do that. And I would love to do it with maybe a little bit of a sugar as an adjunct, get it simple carbohydrates to make a beer that has the alcohol and, the alcohol content and doesn't have all the body and mouthfeel. But it's a very interesting project. Heineken did a number of these from yeast that they had discovered around the world. And I had one, and it's different, and I liked it, but the market said, what is this shit? You know what I mean? So it's very different. And so the project didn't last long. But it was so cool to hear that story from Chris and do some more research and find out how this happened and see a company like Heineken, and then we get the opportunity to brew with it. It was a hoot. And, and I want to do more of it. We're just not in a position to do it right now. But that's where lager yeast came from. And the guy who discovered it, or the main impetus in really figuring it out, was Chris from the UW here. Love those kind of stories. And it's true.
Well, in yeast and control of yeast, it's still a huge thing, and trying to juggle multiple yeasts in a large brewery
This is very nice. What is this? Someone stout?
It's this.
Paul, what is that?
No, it's that one.
This one?
That was the one.
Okay.
It's quite, whatever this is quite nice.
I like them all.
Question?
So I grew up in Milton, and I was just in the hill above Capitol Brewery, enjoyed all the years. I went traveling the world for about 8-9 years. At the end of 99, when I left, came back around then 2006, had a Capitol Ember again, and it didn't taste the same. I've never figured out if my taste buds changed from having different beers around the world, or if the recipe.
No, the recipe, you know, the irony is I could sit down here, I've been at Capitol in 13 years, I could rattle off almost every single formula. They are in my head, all right? What you were probably tasting with the amber was, as we started to grow as a company, we didn't have the capacity, so we started brewing amber at different facilities. And we did it at Monroe for a while, and I never could stand it out of Monroe.
Jesus.
You know, it's just different. So that very well, it's very astute, and that's probably what you experienced.
I've thought about that a lot. I mean, like, I've always enjoyed it. Yeah, I just didn't know if that was a me thing.
No, you're right. You know,
Well, and you know, beer uses, it's all agricultural products, and it depends on, you know, the year and how good the weather was and how good the crop was, and there's new varieties out there all the time. I mean, the varieties of malt we used, you know, it was 6-row Morex was.
God, I've heard that term for a while.
Yeah, I know you haven't. Was what you used, and it's not even grown anymore. And the same thing with hops and yeast change. And yeast is what's driven styles more than anything. It's what differentiated ales from lagers, as Kirby said, but Weiss beers. And that's basically wild yeast. If we made beer like that in the old days, you'd have been fired.
Got that right.
Well, and that's what I get with sour beers too. And I've gotten to the point where I can understand how people like them, but if I'd have made that back in the day, I'd have walked out of the door.
You know, Randy, I think your point is very well taken, that beer is a natural product. A lot of times people ask you, what do you do for a living, Kirby? I'm a brewmaster. What does that mean? It means I really don't do anything, and I'm good at it. No, what it is I look at myself, like Randy just said, beer is very much a natural product, very much affected by the climate, you know, from a wet year to a dry year and all sorts of things, okay? And what brewers have done over time, immortal, because the oldest known recipe for foodstuff ever found is 7,000 to 8,000 years old from ancient Mesopotamia. We didn't know what the hell we were doing back then. We just know that if you did something, it turned out really good. I look at myself as much as anything as an environmental technician. That we're going to take these great raw materials from Mother Nature, and we've learned that if we make this mash at a certain, you know, grain to water ratio and put them in a very controlled environment in terms of temperature and blah, 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 the natural laws are wonderful, because in that environment, they have to behave a certain way. They ain't going to call in sick, want to raise, all that shit. They're going to, okay, this is where you're at, you've got to do this. And they do that. And so I think a lot of it just has to do with your understanding of what's happening and how to create an environment and add materials that are going to end up with the beer that, you know, you hope to. I'm a combination chef, environmental tech. That's how I view it.
Well, it's two biological entities, humans, unfortunately, and yeast, trying to communicate enough and figure out what the yeast needs to survive and flourish and stay the same, and then give it to them. And that's a lot of trial and error over centuries, but we figured out a lot of it, but communicating with them is very difficult. So That doesn't happen very often, but
Is there actually a story behind the wild rice beer? Because I literally had to win a while.
I love wild rice.
I had to sit down with Clint in order to actually make a wild
Clint loves wild rice.
I want to do a wild
I corrupted him with that stuff. Here's the story behind it, okay? Many years ago when craft first started, besides Summit in Minnesota, there was a brewery called James Page. Jim was a
Hughes.
lawyer. He wasn't a brewer, okay?
Page, yeah.
But he saw potential in the industry, and he was a nice guy. And he once bought me down a wild rice beer he did. I said, well, wow, you use a cereal cooker? And he goes, huh? No, I'm just throwing it in with a malt. Understand, you're not really going to, it's not going to do much in that type of thing, okay? But, all right, a few years after that, we were trying to think of a beer to do for Thanksgiving. One of the guys who was part of the brewery walked up to me and wrote wild rice beer on a piece of paper. I looked at him and said, oh, come on, man. I'd have to go find a vessel to use as a cereal cooker and blah, blah, I'll do it. And so we went out to this dairy supply company and found a vessel that could handle, steam and had an open top. And we literally mounted it up on pallets and strapped it down and Rube Goldberg steam into it. And we cut these big wooden paddles by hand. And we were standing, if you've ever been to Capitol, the railings in the brew house are about that wide. And we're standing up there like this, stirring this stuff. And we add you add a little bit of malt charge in there first, just to get some enzyme in there to help out. And then you add the rice. And the first thing I did is I started to stir, I broke the paddle. We had a couple paddles because it was so dense. And I'm going, oh man, you're out of your mind. This ain't gonna work. But new paddle, stir, stir, stir. Got the boil, added to the main mash, and when I did conversion and got conversion, they must have heard me in Madison, I was so excited. Added it to the fermenting tank, and let's see what happens. I didn't know what to expect. And I was just astounded by this. It doesn't make sense unless you've had it. This beer was a 12.5 Plato beer. It had, a blend of 2 and 6 roll malt, which I used to use a lot. Some Victory malt, because I thought Victory would work well with wild rice. And it was the first beer I did was about 15% wild rice, knowing that was pretty powerful flavored. I've always, Capitol, like, we never had a pilot brewery. I had to make 20-barrel brews, and we had to sell it. So when I learned to formulate on the side of being conservative, because you can still sell it and then tweak it as time goes on. Anyways, when I hit the cooling on this tank and tasted it, absolutely astounded by this fruity nuttiness, which doesn't make any sense until you tried it, but it made for a very, very good, unique, and interesting beer. It didn't sell worth a shit. And I love this stuff. And we did it for a few years and backed off, and then we had some passion left. Did a 100-barrel run when Carl Nolan started mid-2000. It sold in 5 minutes. We did it next year, it languished. I could never understand it because it was the perfect craft beer, so to speak. Very interesting, very unique, and very, very drinkable. Because again, gang, the most important thing in the beer is drinkable. You know what that means? Don't put me down, you want another swallow. And it should stay that way if you have one or a dozen. It should always stay your friend. I look at beer as being an adjunct to the enjoyment of life. I've got to say, one of the problems I have with so many of the craft beers I taste today, they're freak shows. They're big and loud. Look at me, try this, try this.
And I like them. I like the flavor, but I have to struggle to get through a pint.
Well, that's the truth. How long do you want to... Randy, with my mouth, how
That's
long
not the
can you
beer
sit next
that
to me talking?
made this country.
Show-offs and
drinkability,
freak shows get old quickly, right?
My friends throw that in my face all the time, but I promote drinkability.
Yeah.
You've got to have a beer that, the average person can drink 2, 3, several of.
Couple 2-3 beers. So anyways, but wild rice worked great, and then I decided to do a double bock with it. And wild rice is called Menumen, and all German double bocks have an A-T-O-R ending. So the beer was Menumator. I met one person who could say that. I'd be working at an event. What's this here manometer? What's up, Moober? No one could pronounce the name. And it was actually a very, very nice beer. And I have done a couple wild rice bocks at Wisconsin and at our Oconomowoc location because I put in a little cereal cooker there. I love brewing with adjuncts. But no, wild rice is it's a lot of fun to brew with. I did a little write-up on it. If you give me your email, I'll send it to you.
Wild rice is one of those things because the flavor profile is a little bit out there. It's a little bit wild. It's kind of like To me, it's like rye whiskey. A little is fantastic. A little plus is way over the top bad, or too much. It,
Nice.
oh, yeah, here we go.
Oh, what's it about wild rice too? We used to buy some. We used to get it from North Bay Trade in Brewer, Wisconsin. A guy named Gregor Saxon. He was a great guy. He loved what we were doing, so he'd sell me the rice for his cost, and it was still expensive. But one year it was usually Brokens from Minnesota patty rice. But one year he couldn't get that. He goes, "Well, I'm going to cut you a deal." He would go up to Canada, and he'd be flown into a lake, and the native Canadians, Americans, whatever, were out in all the lakes in the area harvesting wild rice, and they'd load up these pontoon float planes that would literally be wobbling to land there, so full of rice, and they'd throw this rice out on docks, and you'd select the stuff you want. And one year he couldn't give me the broken, so he sold me some of this cheap. And guys, these grains were like this long, and it made for a much more intense, different tasting wild rice beer. And the biggest irony was, after we'd released that, I'm out in our outdoor beer garden, and some guy, I was talking to some guys, and there's some guy I didn't know, and I said, this year we use a different wild rice. There's got to be a difference in wild rices. And the guy goes, yes, there is. It turns out he was a professor at the University of Minnesota, and especially was wild rice. And so he really, he was telling me all the differences. It was very cool. Very cool. Wild rice box, how much % wild rice you got in there?
About 15.
15? Did you cereal cook it or what?
I just cooked it on the stove the night before I brewed, and then I added the strike water before I mash it.
Did you boil it at all? Okay, cool. At one time someone was doing pre-gelatinized. I flaked wild rice in California so you wouldn't have to do the cereal cooker. It's not doing it, but you know what? You got to use a cereal cooker to do it right.
On a home scale, what would a cereal cooker look like? It's just cooking shit out of it.
I'm sorry, what?
On a home scale, a cereal cooker is just cooking the shit out of it on the stove.
You got to be careful. You know what I mean? You've got to. I know it's the first wild rice trials I did. I was using a real little thing, and wild rice, by the way, really sucks with the water and got thick quick. By the way, speaking of doing interesting brews, which one's a wild rice? Right one right there?
Yeah, no.
Right? Oh, I get it. I get to brew next week. Who's been to Old World, Wisconsin and seen their brewing system? Isn't that cool? They have a system that's supposed to emulate the mid-1800s brewing. And, so it's basically fire, a mash, and a fire with a boil kettle and a hop back in that. Well, they asked me to brew on it, and so I decided to do a porter, but I started, of course, why do it simply when you can complicate it? And I started reading about porters from the mid-1800s in this country. It would just say malt, amber malt, and brown malt, and porterine. So I got a bag of 6-row, because it was all 6-row then, and that's one of the things I admire about home brewing. If I look at, I want to do what it like. How do I make amber malt? And there's instructions from guys who have done this. So I'm making amber malt and some brown malt. And porterine is just when you take corn syrup and just start cooking it and get it darker. So I'm using 6-row. I'm going to brew a porter using malts that I roasted in my oven, porterine, and since it's totally warm, I'm going to use hothead Quebec yeast and see what the hell happens. It's only 5 gallons. Excuse me? Yeah.
A big one.
My first experience. By the way, if you go there's a guy who used to be the brewmaster at Miller called Gary Luther, who's a great guy and really knows his stuff. You should see some of the old brewery stuff they have on display. I mean, old equipment that he's
Are you sharing?
No.
God damn it.
That he's got from old
That's
breweries
him.
when he goes to Germany, which he goes to a lot. I'm doing this next Thursday. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know if it's going to make a real good beer per se, using modern standards, but so what? And I might brew it in a loincloth.
Oh boy.
I had a party, and I got a quart barrel of the wild rice to serve to all my guests, and it was a huge hit.
Thank you. That's one of the ironies here. We're talking about all sorts of interesting beers tonight. 50% of the beer drank in this country is probably still a light beer. Our overall light beer nation.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's why, again, at Wisconsin, I'm behind the bar, I can tell times people come in and say, what's your lightest? And so it's Wisconsin Vacation, which it was basically, it's an expensive beer to make because it's floor malted Bohemian and a little bit of Hannah, the original strain that they used to make Pilsners with in Czechoslovakia. Boy, I had something to say after that. Of course, it shot through my mind. I am enjoying this, by the way, this wild rice pack. The flavor is there.
Good
Smooth
character. Yep. Yeah, actually, a thing about the Badgers and Old Style. Back in the day, probably 80s, early 90s, Heileman was a big, supporter of Badger football, and they actually had, I think it was Barry Alvarez on the can, and it was like, okay, well, you don't see that very often anymore, do you? So.
You know what you don't see very often anymore?
Yeah.
You know what you don't see very often anymore? Billboards of Randy Hughes as you enter Wisconsin.
They'd look a little different now.
I didn't know you'd done it. I saw that.
Well, I didn't know they did that either until you called me or told me.
That was
yeah.
great.
All right. Well.
Randy, what's the feedback from lacrosse for changing and bringing back Old Style?
That's great.
Is there enough out there that appreciates it?
They're very happy. And I'm the happiest. It's not being made the way it used to be, but the flavor profile is very close. And it left under my watch, and I've been working for years to have it come back, and it's come back under my watch, and I'm happy.
They're
And
not doing a Kreuzen anymore, are they?
it's not being Kreuzen, but the formulation has been modified to
Emulate that?
emulate that.
Cool.
And it actually works. And yeah, there's a lot I could go on about that, but
That's why we're here.
I'd have to throw this mic away. No, but it's back, and I'm the happiest person I can rest easy. What's that?
Is it getting market share?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. And Chicago. The volume has
Really?
definitely picked up.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I'm happy. And I've brewed more Old Style than anybody that ever existed on this planet. Yeah, right.
Yes, Bob.
I just, when you said people coming up and what's the lightest beer you have, that brings back a memory to a beer festival in Kenosha. Bob Drouse, Dana Edgel, and I were hanging out with you at your booth, and all these people would come up to you and say, what's the lightest beer you've got? And you would say, you get the double buck.
Yes, I would. and you know what?
And they came back.
And the vast majority of the time, people said, hey, I can drink this. They didn't go out and buy it, but I was just literally, no,
Yeah.
you got to try this. But you've got to have milder beers. Okay, here's an analogy. McDonald's. A guy who owned McDonald's franchises told me this, said, why does McDonald's sell salads? They were, they studied everything on the planet, obviously, in terms of their customers. They realized that 5 people jump in a car to go out for lunch, and most of their cars go, let's go to McDonald's and get a burger. And then you got some guys on a diet, no, I can just eat a salad. And so McDonald's was out. So they realized, well, if we have to offer salads for the audience who doesn't really want a hamburger. So they did, and it was a success. And then they realized more often than not that the moron who wanted the salad also got a hamburger. So that's why, again, we're glad that the laws changed where we can offer wine again. At the brewery, and we have seltzers on tap because you're going to have folks who just don't like beer, and you've got to have I like having a mild lager offering because not everyone in the world wants an IPA or a stout.
And that's exactly what I was getting at with the craft brewers, and I stopped going to a couple because everything was hops, more hops, and most hops, and I love hops, but I like malt and hops in balance and drinkability. And man, these double and triple IPAs are, well, and of course a lot of the small brewers start out with those because hops can cover up a world of sin, actually, or problems. And I just like that they're coming back and doing some more milder traditional styles. I'm sure it's helping their sales, and it's really the way beer should be. And you can make pale ale, good old school American pale ales, had it right. You had the IBU somewhere in the maybe 30 to 40 range, which is kind of the top end as far as drinkability, in my opinion. I can drink several of those and have many times, so it's repeatable. But man, you get up where most of them, they're up so high you can't even analyze it properly. 70, 80, 90, 100 or more.
You did Psychopath for me? I remember that it was
geez.
That was an honest 89 BU.
Yeah.
On paper it's 135, but the yield isn't there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
a little extreme.
IBU is kind of a touchy analysis anyway. Yeah, so you only get so close, but man, they get it so high now, and it's all you taste, and then it hangs on your tongue, and I like them. Maybe a pint, maybe two. That's it, I'm done. And then, of course, they crank the alcohol up so high on a lot of those. It's like, holy man. 2 is the equivalent of 4, 5 regular beers, which they could sell at the same price. So, I don't know. I just like drinkability and some balance to some degree in all beers.
What are you going to find in most brewers' refrigerators? Hams, Paps, mild lagers.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear some more questions. Mr. Rogers.
You've been doing the Guardians of the Granite stone beer for quite a while.
We haven't.
How did the first
That's
one go?
right, I forgot that.
How did what?
The first one go over in arena.
The first, what Bill was talking about was many years ago I used to edit for Brewery O magazine. And one of the articles I got was on a Stein beer, using stone. I'm going, oh, that's pretty cool. But we couldn't do it at Capital, so I called Robbie at the Dane and said, hey, man, if I get a vessel that could hold like one of your brews, could we somehow figure out how to get it to your alley and add stones? And he goes, well, no. He goes, but Don Vash is helping some guy. He helped a guy named Tom Porter make a little 3-barrel system in Arena. And so at that time, Tom was the new guy, and he had me with my big mouth come in here. Hey, Mr. Porter, here's what I'd like to do. And he kind of said, well, okay. And so we formulated a Stein beer, and we wanted to see what the stones did. So it was a strong ale. The only thing in it was maris otter, malted barley, and just fuggle for bittering, I think it was. I didn't want any hops getting in the way. And so I get there, and it's a day in the 90s, and Tommy Porter's 75-year-old father, he's got him tending the fire and eating the rocks. And we have a couple guys lift him up, and you could take the lid off this 3-barrel kettle Tom had, so it was perfect. And we had a metal, grill type pot so that he could get at it, and they were carrying on a pipe. And I had escape routes, opening the doors in case it boiled over and everything. And I'm standing there with a hose just in case. All right, boys, drop her in. And it was a beautiful 30-minute benign boil. It didn't try to boil over. And then we augmented it with steam and did a 90-minute boil. That beer may have been one of the absolute best beers I have been party to making. It turned out great. You got this intense caramelization, almost marshmallowy, but not marshmallowy. You could just tell that something had happened there interesting, and it was wonderful. So, of course, we're going to do it again. But the next year, Tommy got engineering friends involved, and they decided we're going to use different granite rocks, different granite boulders. To be a boulder, it has to be 10 inches in diameter, by the way. And so they got some stuff from Rib Mountain. And, we were kind of lackadaisical because the first one went so well with the boil and that. But we still had the escape routes, and we're staring at the hose. Okay, boys, drop in, and Pat Keller and Mike McGuire. Someone took a picture, I've got it. Those rocks hit the kettle, and it erupted. All of a sudden, it just comes flying up in this picture. You can see Porter jumping back like that. Both my friends disappeared in steam and flying wort, and people are yelling. I start spraying, trying to knock down the foaming. All I'm doing is spraying hot wort over McGuire. It calms down. Pat Keller was covered with drops of wart, laughing his ass off. McGuire had a dollar-sized burn patch from wart in his arm that he was so proud of. And the beer sucked, but was worth after the first one being so good. And we decided to hop it up in that. But what really pissed off Porter, and he cursed me for months, was these rocks that I didn't pick them, but his guys picked, turned to sand.
Yeah.
And it got into every pump in his brewery and destroyed all the seals, and he was giving me shit forever about that.
I was going to ask if that happened because rocks in quick high temperatures don't do well. They tend to blow up. Yeah.
We had, and again, when we built Wisconsin, going under the philosophy that it's only funny till someone gets hurt, then it's hilarious. And so we did it. I brewed this strong ale and a 60-barrel brew, and we'd pump 20 barrels out in the 600-gallon kettle we had. And we'd been cooking rocks. First year, here's what happened. The first year, got a hold of Bill because curling, and he told me that we have used curling stones because the granite used to make curling is supposed to be the hardest granite known to man. And so we were going to use these to boil the wort. Well, the day before we did the first time, we put them in the fire to see what happened. And it turns out if you take these curling stones and put them in a fire, they turn into the hardest sand known to man. They just fell to pieces. So we had to run out and get some rocks. And the first year it was kind of wimpy. But I started thinking about it, and we started to throw a lot of cheesy theater in it. Depth charge, it's going to blow up. So we hired pyrotechnicians who would blow up shit in a pond. But since we'd originally had a connection with the curling club, Bill and I talked, and we decided we'd have the Guardians of the Granite. And what that was is a bunch of curling people holding their brooms, marching in front of the, we have a big forklift carrying this good-sized pot full of rocks that we've been putting in a fire, for 8 to 10 hours. And so they were marching in front of it as we took it to the kettle, and we have bagpipers and drummers, but they served a purpose. This is super hot, and we wanted some kind of blockade so people wouldn't walk up to it. And the beer, we brew it, ferment it, and age it in wood for a year to sell it next year's depth charge. It was okay, all right? I never was as impressed as what the first one was, but ironically, we put it in wooden barrels and aged it for a year. And I was telling someone earlier tonight that from 2017, one of the barrels got put on a rack with other barrels and ignored. And we found, about a year or so ago, we had 40 barrels of who knows what, because every time we had excess beer from a pilot brewery or using our hop rocket, we'd throw it in a bourbon barrel and see what happened. And some of this shit just sat there for years. Lo and behold, we found this was in 24, we found a barrel of 2017 depth charge. And I'm going, this is going to be good. Oh yeah, it was magical. It was as good as a beer I've ever had in my life. It was wonderful. I wish I'd saved 50 barrels like that. We have 1/6 barrel left of it. I don't know what's going to happen with it. But, it just sitting in the wood that long worked magic. It's pretty interesting. Does that answer your question about the Guardians of the Granite?
Well, we want to know if you tapped this keg. You can let us know if you tapped this.
You know what? I think maybe around a Great Taste, we're just going to put it on tap quick just to sell it. I didn't, I was saying, well, if we want to get back in that contest, even though I haven't entered contests forever, this might be a good one to start with because it's killer and it'll do well. But it was decided, we have a 6 barrel left. Let's just serve it. That's what we're going to do, and I think it's going to be around a great taste. I'm not sure. All right, gang. I mean, I could talk for months, but I
Oh,
won't.
we're going to 11 a.m., right?
I can
We're only
do it.
halfway there.
Yeah, I really don't know what you guys want to hear tonight, but I hope this was okay.